Fire in Silüet. Written by Musa Onal. Entrance. December 5, 1914. A steely cold had set in, and gloomy ashen clouds had accumulated in the air. The country was gradually being dragged into a bitter war. The Ottoman Empire was now exhausted and had become a sick man. This country lost every war it fought and lost countless sons of the country. Like the falling leaves of autumn, the empire was writhing in bitter reproach. It was a sad spring, a wounded spring. When I saw that my country was being dragged into a bitter war, my heart could not stand it and my eyes were constantly filled with tears. As an officer of the Ottoman Empire, which was on the brink of the abyss, I was ready and waiting to do all my duties. The Sultan of the country had now completely lost his qualifications and began to despise his seat. While the country was progressing piece by piece, the enemy was preparing to step on every inch of its territory. The enemy ships had dropped their anchors in the Bosphorus and were waiting for further orders. Clouds of gloom had already gathered over the country. There was no turning back from here. The Turkish nation, tired of fighting, would once again surrender to its fate and raise the sick man to his feet. The Turkish nation was tired, exhausted, hungry, and miserable, but despite everything, they were going to fight a new war with everything they had. While the wounds of the Balkan War were just healing, it seemed that we could never bear another one, because our ammunition against the enemy was stones and slings. Even if you have to leave a girl you love behind, enter that war and fight with all your heart, because your lover, whose scent you cannot get enough of, will be waiting for you. But the homeland whose scent you cannot get enough of will exist as long as you resist. My commanders would say. Now I understand them better. The Turkish nation was left alone with its bitter fate in a harsh cold. The Sultan was having fun watching the enemy ships anchoring in the Bosphorus from the garden of Dolmabahce Palace. While the British, Italians, French, and Greeks were trying to evacuate with all their might, the Istanbul government was trying to beautify the invaders. Yes, my country was going piece by piece. It was as if the gloomy clouds were gathering over Aksahir, over the homeland, never to disperse. The entire burden of the Ottoman Empire, which was collapsing day by day, fell on our shoulders. I couldn't waste any time. The silent attitude of the Istanbul government touched my heart. I became a member of the Committee of Union and Progress. While the smell of gunpowder spread over our country, I leaned my back on a mountain I trusted. I wasn't very interested in politics, but I couldn't say I didn't have a revolutionary heart. It was my generous heart that burned like a coal that made me a soldier and the commander of the Western headquarters that I dreamed of. As the dates were chasing each other, Istanbul was officially occupied, and although the Sultan did not accept this, the reins were now in the hands of the occupying forces. Ships with wide funnels saluted the sick and kneeling empire. You could take everything from this nation, it would say nothing. It was a generous nation, but our people would never lose their freedom to a few looters. I found myself sitting by the window with sad eyes. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it was going to jump out. While the Ottoman Empire was in its last days, our debts increased and our lands on other continents disappeared one by one. I opened the window all the way, and my eyes misted as I breathed in the linden scent. While a bitter war was knocking on our door, I blew my troubles and sorrow into the smoke of a cigarette. After that word from my commander, the thing I feared most was falling in love in this desperate war. I was so afraid of falling in love that I couldn't see anything. Part 1. Ash-colored clouds gathered over Aksahir. The snow that fell in the morning had stopped and a white quilt covered this beautiful city. A bitter cold spread through my long and wavy black hair, making me feel cold throughout my body. We walked on the stone pavement illuminated by the gloomy and pale street lamp and stopped in front of the two-story historical building. The honeycomb light coming from the wide windows with wooden frames fascinated him. Taking my last breath from the cigarette that was getting smaller and smaller between my fingers, I blew the smoke from my mouth into the deep darkness of the night and crushed the cigarette I threw on the ground with my boot. "Come on, let's go in," said Savar, "before it gets cold." I could feel my nose and cheeks turning red as I buried my head into the thick and furry uniform. Savar smoked his cigarette a little more politely out of respect for me. After crushing the butt, he smiled at me, stroking his thick black mustache that had crystallized from the cold. "Yes, Commander Ralph." He put on his felt hat, which made his head look bigger than it was, and we started walking towards the wooden door of the headquarters. While my leather-gloved hands were covering my fingers, my eyes, squinting under the rickety street lamp, were looking at the cream-colored facade of the headquarters. What will happen to this country, Saysavar? They will face the wrath of the Turkish people. Commander, the homeland will not be lost. Aksahir will not be lost. His eyebrows, stretched like a bow over his flashing eyes, frowned solemnly, while the nostrils of his nose opened and closed rapidly. I turned around, buried in the container, blowing out the silver-gray smoke from my mouth. While the night call to prayer was heard from the oil lamp minaret of the Aplixi Mosque, which stretches between the shops of Arasta Bazaar, the halva sellers had started to roast the famous tahini halva. I took a deep breath of the bittersweet but delicious scent into my lungs and threw myself through the door of the headquarters, unable to bear the bitter cold. While the soldiers on duty stood up respectfully, the crackle of the burning stove inside and the smell of chestnuts cooking on it licked my nose. I motioned them to sit down with my leather-gloved hands and told them to get comfortable. Their faces, silhouetted in the pale light of the kerosene lamp, relaxed, and they settled back down on the chairs beneath them as I climbed up the wooden stairs in my boots. Both Saysavar and I, wearing our black and heavy boots, climbed to the floor where my room was. As I was walking towards my room, I turned to Fyut, who was writing something intently under the table lamp in front of him. "Fyut, can I have a coffee?" "If you command, Commander." As his dry and bony hands greeted me and then walked downstairs quickly, squeaks could be heard coming from the steps. As I took off my coat with scattered snowflakes and hung it on the metal hanger with its peeling paint, my eyes excitedly shifted to my typewriter waiting for me next to the scattered notes on my desk. My identity as an innocent man of letters was hidden under my serious stance and harsh gaze. After warming my hands on the crackling stove, I turned the radio button on the edge of the wooden-framed window with a gentle hand gesture. I heard muffled voices and crackles echoing through the thick walls. When I turned my calm eyes to the sky, the snow was falling heavily over Aksahir again. I pulled the leather-covered swivel chair under the desk and sat down at my typewriter. The metal-handled gun on my waist was hurting me. I slowly took out the gun and placed it in the first compartment of the drawer. Lifting the folded paper at the end of the typewriter, I looked at the places I had written before. Half of the paper was filled with black letters resembling dots, while the other half was empty, still maintaining its whiteness. I thought to myself, it's like humanity, good and evil, black and white are always fighting. While my fingers were pressing the keys of the typewriter, the sounds echoed pleasantly and reached my ears in the room illuminated by the pale gas lamp. I had written a few sentences when the wooden door of my room was knocked repeatedly. "Come," I called, looking up from the paper. "I brought your coffee, Commander Ralph." Fyut carefully placed the gilded cup in his hand on my table and smiled under his curled mustache. "Bon appetit. Good luck, my Pasha," he said. I continued writing, smiling at her bright eyes looking at me with all their warmth. "Thank you, Fyut. Good luck to you too. Your job is really difficult while our country is being invaded piece by piece. Pasha, may God help you." "May God help us all, Fyut." I spoke with great determination, placing my shaky and bony fingers on my metal-handled gun. He placed his hands next to his knees, bowed his head slightly, and left the room with determined steps. After taking the first sip of the steamy, foamy coffee, the cold I had just ate disappeared. While I was drinking the hot coffee from the small cup with great pleasure, I was continuing to write. The pale light above my desk flickered and went out. While the song on the radio continued to play in my dimly lit room, the room was only lit by the kerosene lamp hanging on the wall. I felt my fingers hurt, and I sat up from the chair I was sitting on. Opening my drawer next to my desk, I pulled a cigarette from the silver tray to my lips, lighting it to relieve my tiredness a little. As the ash-colored smoke dispersed into the room, I stood in front of the wooden-framed window. The whole of Aksahir was in a deep sleep. The fluffy snowflakes could be seen under the orange street lamp on the street. While I was taking deep breaths from my cigarette and blowing it out, my eyes caught the road winding in this direction through Arasta Bazaar. A dark silhouette was approaching the headquarters. As my lips became dry, my heartbeat accelerated, and I tried to remain calm so as not to alarm the soldiers. While pressing the freshly lit cigarette tightly into the ashtray, I turned off the radio with its crackling sound. After taking my coat and hat from the hanger next to the bookshelf, where rows of books were lined up, I quickly stepped outside. As soon as I walked out the door, I saw Saysavar and Fyut. Saysavar was chatting with Fyut as my departure time was approaching. As soon as I left the red velvet-covered chairs behind and stepped on the step, I was distracted by Saysavar's voice. "Ralph Pasha, where, if you allow me, can I come too?" "No," I protested, frowning. I threw myself out, supporting myself from the banisters. While my boots were making a sound by crushing the snow under my feet with pleasant crunches, I looked hard at the person approaching me in silhouette. He looked away as if he were afraid of me. Then he quickened his steps, as if he wanted to escape from me. "Hey you. Stay where you are." She adjusted the veil on her head with her velvet-gloved hands and continued walking as if I wasn't there. "Who am I talking to?" Just as he was about to accelerate, his foot got caught in the snow mass and his delicate body fell onto the soft snow. I frowned and grabbed her arm tightly. Her arms under the tulle veil were as thin as toothpicks. He tried to free his arm from my fingers, but I didn't let go. When she stood up, she shook the snow off her without speaking. Only her bright eyes looking at me could be seen from under her veil. The person walking slowly, avoiding the cold, was a woman. I slowly relaxed my fingers, released her arm, and asked, "What's your name?" "Irva," he stammered in his trembling voice. "Will you lift your veil?" She lifted her white veil with her bony, thin fingers. My heart felt like it was about to explode. I was literally mesmerized. Her wavy brown hair flowing foamily on her shoulders and her tiny nose above her curved lips almost complimented herself. When he saw me looking at him with such admiring eyes, he looked at his feet with his sparkling brown eyes and his cheeks turned as red as an apple. "Where do you come from at this time?" My commanding tone was gone and I was as soft as cotton before the beauty I saw. "Book," he said in his small voice. "I bought a book from my friend. That's where I come from." I glanced at the book with crime and punishment written on its cover and continued my speech. "Okay, Irva, you can go, but is it okay to wander around the streets much? Especially in isolated places. You know, you may encounter an enemy at any time." I scratched my hardened black mustache with 2 fingers. "Thank you. Can I also know your name if it is not confidential?" He looked away from me while talking. My heart was pounding with excitement, and I continued my speech without expressing that strange excitement. "Of course, my name is Ralph. Commander Ralph." "I am pleased, Mr. Ralph. Good luck in your duty." As she slowly left me, the scent of lavender and honeysuckle coming from her skin hit my nose. When I cast my timid gaze on the ground, the square embroidered handkerchief lying buried in the snow at the end of my boots caught my eye. I rescued the handkerchief from its place and called out sincerely, "Irva." When he looked at me with his meaningful gaze under his eyebrows thinning like a bow, I corrected myself. "Miss Irva, can you take a look?" "Come on, Mr. Ralph. I think this handkerchief is yours. It may have fallen off." "Yes, that's very kind of you. Thank you." As her fingers took the tissue in my palm, I literally buried the softness of her skin and the smile on her curved lips into my heart. He said good night and continued walking. "Good night. See you, Miss Irva." I watched him until he disappeared at the end of the narrow snow-covered street. While I was distracted by the voice coming from Saysavar. "Ralph Pasha, who was that?" "A civilian," I said, removing the stagnant look in my eyes. Saysavar came to me and greeted me. "Come on, let's go, Saysavar. We have more work to do," I said, and we started walking towards the end of the street with lazy steps. The snow was falling heavily as it was visible under the pale street lamp. I was blowing smoke out of my mouth as I put my cold hands into the pockets of my thick, furry coat. The unique scent of the tissue was still at the tip of my nose. "Why are you so thoughtful, Ralph Pasha?" I turned my gaze to Saysavar to dispel the gloomy and stagnant atmosphere in my eyes. I lied by saying homeland. How can I be happy when my homeland is lost? Saysavar, how can I be happy when Axahir is lost? After saying that, I kept silent and listened to the breathing of the snow and Saysavar, who were taking in the deep silence of the night for a while. My leather boots were crushing the hardened snow that accumulated under my feet. "You are right, Pasha, very right. The enemy is at the door of your homeland and covets what is yours." Suddenly, Irva came to life in my eyes, the Irva I had never met and saw for the first time. As I watched the snowflakes falling at my feet, I continued talking. "They will not take from us what is ours, neither our land, nor our love, nor our dreams." I scratched my mustache, which was wrinkled from the cold, with my finger, and turned my furrowed eyebrows into the darkness of the night. Sasevar nodded as if confirming me, took a cigarette from his silver tray, took it from his pocket, brought it to his lips, and handed it to me. I took the cigarette from the tray and brought it to my lips, thinking that a cigarette wouldn't hurt until I get home. After lighting my cigarette with Sasevar's expensive Zippo, I took deep breaths one after another. Thank you, Sasevar. You're welcome, Ralph Pasha. May your lungs rejoice. I'm coming back from here. Have a good night, he repeated, pointing to the end of the pitch-dark narrow street. I continued my speech while taking the orange-bottomed cigarette between my fingers. Good night. There may be a Greek on every street corner. Be careful. While the bitter tobacco smell emanating from his lips licked my face, he said, Be careful too, Ralph Pasha. The sound coming from between the snowy ground and my boots got louder as I accelerated. I stared helplessly at my feet, thoughtful and pensive. Did I fall in love with all the revolutionary issues? What if love is more burning than revolution? Even I didn't believe the whisper coming out of my teeth. In the darkness of the night, only the sweet redness of the cigarette between my lips could be seen. When I arrived in front of the Grand Mosque next to my house, the faces of people who had prayed and were getting ready to leave looked like silhouettes in the kerosene lamp. Looking at the courtyard surrounded by trees with dried branches, I called out, May God accept it. Voices saying, Thank you, in unison echoed in the silence of the night. When I left the mosque behind and arrived in front of the house, I put out the cigarette, and when I opened the door of the house with the red bay window, I had a bitter feeling. I took the kerosene lamp hanging on the wall and turned it on. In front of me, from the stained full-length mirror, stood the lively commander of the Committee of Union and Progress, with sunken eyes, his shoulders drooping forward, making his body look older than it was, and his hair splashed with white. Unable to look at myself any longer, I walked up the creaking wooden stairs. The kerosene lamp in my hand barely illuminated the pale room. I lazily walked to the kitchen and hugged the bottle of raki waiting for me in my cupboard. I took out a thin glass, ice, and a few appetizers. I placed my food and alcohol on the marble table. My body was tired, but my soul was never tired. I poured 2 fingers of raki into the bottom of the glass, added a few ice cubes, and topped it off with water. As the altitude turned gum white, my appetite whetted. While the light of the kerosene lamp was flickering and trying to illuminate the room, I took a huge sip of alcohol. A sudden fire engulfed my whole body as it burned my throat and went down to my veins. I fell in love with a girl whose eyes I looked at and whose hair I touched. I knew this was a behavior that did not suit the Committee of Union and Progress, but the old Ralph was gone and a completely different person took his place. As Irva's striking gaze came to my mind, the rate at which the glass emptied was increasing. I stared out the wooden-framed window. The snow was falling without losing its beauty. After finishing my raki, I fell down on the sofa next to me and fell asleep right there. I woke up with fists pounding on my door, and when I stood up from the sofa, my head hurt like hell. I put my clothes in order and quickly went down the wooden stairs. The smell of tobacco mixed with the bitter anise smell licked my nose. I opened the door, and as the morning cold hit my face like a strong slap, I saw Ova in front of the door, looking at me with her innocent eyes. I scratched my eyes thinking it was a dream, but it wasn't a dream. Good morning, she said, looking at my confused face. Day. Good morning, Ms. Irva. I brought you something for breakfast. Did I do something wrong, Ralph Pasha? As my lips slowly curled under my thin mustache, my eyes smiled. No, you did well, thank you. She held out the bundle in her hand, looking away from me. I took the bundle from her hand with my smile fading as I looked at her beauty. Bon appetit, I called after Irva, who started to descend the stone steps. How did you learn my home address? He turned around and looked at me out of the corner of his eye. From your soldier, he said, and disappeared into the snow that was almost over his height. I watched Irva disappear at the end of the narrow street, forgetting the cold that slapped me in the face. After eating the breakfast he brought with great appetite, I got dressed and headed to the headquarters. The snow that had been falling since the night had stopped, and a dry cold prevailed in the narrow and gloomy streets of Axahir. Ash-colored clouds were again hovering over the beautiful country. Desolation, plainness, and loneliness had descended on these once cheerful streets. Neither neighbors greeted each other nor children's laughter could be heard. The war made us forget that we are human. As my eyes filled with these thoughts, I entered the door of the headquarters. The uniformed soldiers remained serious. Good morning, soldier. My voice echoed between the thick stone walls. Good morning, Commander. As I walked up the creaking wooden stairs, I heard movement on the creaking floor. Sasevar was standing next to Silüet, looking at me with shy eyes. They both stood up from the wooden chairs they were sitting on and greeted me. While shaking my head at Silüet, I fixed my dull gaze on Sasevar and said, Sasevar. Sir Rauf Pasha? His voice was trembling, and his bright eyes could only be seen in the dimly lit hall of the headquarters. Will you come to my room? Of course, my Pasha, he said, coming after me with quick steps and closing the creaking door with a slow move of his hand. I felt uncomfortable as I inhaled the smell of kerosene mixed with the cigarette smell from last night. I opened the window with wooden frames and felt goosebumps as a dry cold licked my face. When I left the window open to ventilate the room and turned around, Sasevar had turned pale. Did you give anyone your address today? When I repeated it in my calm voice, the tense expression on his face was replaced by relief. Give it. I gave it to you, Pasha. I gave you the address of your house. But she wanted it so bad. It was the lady from the other night. His eyes, under his eyebrows stretched like a bow, were avoiding me from time to time. Okay, thank you. His lips curled up involuntarily under his small nose that harmonized with his shapely face. What does the telegram from last night say? I asked. As he handed me the paper he took out of the pocket of his dark green uniform, he began to explain. Rauf Pasha writes that the occupying forces can roam among us as civilians, that we cannot cause any harm to them as Turkish soldiers, and that we must remain in a ceasefire until further notice. Of course, we will not know that these are occupying forces. As I crumpled the straw paper between my fingers and clenched my teeth with all my strength, I tasted a strong taste of blood between my lips. I frowned. How can this be? This is nothing but tying our hands. It is a great betrayal to the country and the nation, Commander. We need to clean up this black stain on our country. While I clasped my trembling fingers on the wooden table, I stared out the window with my absent-minded and angry gaze. What does the Committee of Union and Progress say about this? Sasevar continued speaking, swallowing hard. They are silent, Commander Rauf, but I do not think they will submit to this decision. While Sasevar fell into deep silence in front of me, I opened the crumpled paper and whispered through my lips the two words written in crooked handwriting at the bottom right. Istanbul government. I continued my words while scratching my chin quickly with my fingers. We will wait for the news from the Committee of Union and Progress. This decision ties our hands. Sasevar, after listening to what I said attentively. Yes, Commander Rauf, he said. As he was dragging his leather boots across the rotting wooden floor, I called after him. Send Silüet on your way out, Sasevar. After closing the creaking door, the gloomy light filtering through the windows revealed the cigarette smoke and dust inside the room. I stood up with calm eyes, moved to the edge of the wooden-framed window, and started to look outside again with hope. The sun coming out of the silver-gray clouds was melting the snow, but it could not prevent the freezing cold and the snowfall that would follow. Fists were pounding on my room door one after another. I lifted my head up, took a deep breath, and called out. Come. The door handle slowly lowered, and Silüet's bright eyes looked inside from top to bottom. He stood in front of me. You ordered me, Rauf Pasha. Yes, Silüet, I said through my teeth. There is an important issue. We all have to be together. His fingers, holding the feathered beret in his palms, suddenly tightened with all his strength. His forehead wrinkled as he frowned his shapely eyebrows. I am listening to you, Rauf Pasha. I walked around my wooden table and got a little closer to Silüet. Beads of sweat were flowing from his broad forehead and flowing down his temples. Occupying forces, I bit my upper lip and my lower lip. They were coming to Aksahir. I swallowed hard and remained silent. When he said, we will do what is necessary, Pasha, his eyes were shining and his voice was trembling. The Istanbul government tied our hands and arms. Our only solution is union and progress. According to the decision coming from Istanbul, the occupying forces will be wherever they want, but we hope that the Unionists will definitely oppose this. If a decision is made against this government, will you be with me? Tears flowing from his bright eyes, flowing down the corner of his small nose, he spoke. We are always with you for this country, Rauf Pasha. We have no other homeland. We have no other history. We have no other culture. We have no other flag. We must explain this to those who destroyed our homeland for a penny. He licked the tears from his lips and did not take his misty eyes off me. I tried to talk without taking my eyes off him. Autumn. Good. Then we are gathering at the mansion next to the Grand Mosque tonight. It's time to light up the night and shout the screams of freedom over the whole country. He left my room without changing the expression on his pale face. I sat helplessly on the leather swivel chair just below me. My drawer opened with a squeak, and I took out my shining gun. My heartbeat accelerated and my hands started to shake. Underneath the wooden-handled revolver, I saw the paper, folded in four and turning yellow. My dry, bony fingers gripped the paper tightly, and I opened it with strong rustling sounds. I read the messy but beautiful handwritten text. The ink was still wet. Is it possible to never lose your love for writing? There was neither a signature nor a name, but my heart had already accepted the person who wrote it. Was love something like this? Keeping the bad away from it and looking for the good behind it. My lips curled, forgetting what had just happened. While I carefully placed my gun and note into the drawer, my mind was deep in thought. They wanted to divide us into two and destroy us, but we would never allow that. I pulled a cigarette from my silver tray, whose presence I always felt next to me, to my dry lips. As it blew its smoke out, silver-gray gloomy clouds closed the air again. At that moment, I heard the sound of a vehicle approaching towards the headquarters. I looked at the window with curiosity. He was moving towards here, breaking through the snow on the narrow stone street. While the smell of bitter tobacco licked my nose, I watched the inside of the vehicle with full attention. The Jeep, which I expected to stop at the headquarters, continued in the direction it came from. We will wake you up from this dream, I whispered through my teeth. While I was thinking absently in the chair I was sitting on, I was also making deep plans. As the sun slowly disappeared at dusk, the blood-colored red could not be discerned from the gloomy gray clouds. I was filling in the blank paper while drinking my steaming coffee right next to my typewriter. I took a huge sip from the gilded cup, hot coffee flowing from my lips into me. I was focusing on my work when the doorbell rang. Without lifting my thoughtful eyes from the typewriter keys, I said in my weak voice. I said, "Come." The person who entered was none other than Silüet. He continued speaking while his eyebrows became straight under his wrinkled forehead. "You have a visitor, Pasha." I squinted my eyes and stood up from the leather chair I was sitting on, my weak fingers leaning on the wooden table with all their strength. "Here you go, Silüet." "Yes, my Pasha." He shook his head and left the room, dragging his heavy boots. With the questions in my mind, I reluctantly got up and started waiting for the person to enter the door. The pale oil lamp on the wall was flickering and burning, adding a tumultuous light to the dim room. The metal curved door handle slowly bent, its first shadow spread with the light hitting the corridor, and soon Irva appeared at the door, covering her beautiful face with a veil. "Can I come?" "Come." "Of course you can," I said, walking around the table and sitting next to him. I shook off the snow from the square embroidered patterned shawl she had put on her shoulder and hung it up. He took timid steps and sat down on one of the armchairs in front of my desk. Irva, who had previously been ashamed to lift her veil, this time took down her veil, which resembled a tulle curtain, without me telling her. The pale orange glow from the light was shining on Irva's face. "Welcome." While my bright eyes were watching him, I was avoiding him. "I enjoyed it, Mr. Ralph." He clasped his thin fingers together and stared at his feet with his brown eyes. As I sat across from him, my lips curled and I smiled under my thin mustache and asked, "Did you leave the note?" "Home." "Yeah, don't you like it?" "Oh, no. On the contrary, it made me happy." She moistened her lips with her little pink tongue. While she was gathering her brown hair that flowed foamily over her shoulders, her eyes shifted to the typewriter on the table. "Were you writing again?" I sighed heavily and continued speaking, looking at the snowflakes becoming more and more visible under the street lamps as it got darker. "Whenever I find free time to get away from these troubled days." My forehead wrinkled as my eyebrows furrowed. "Mr. Ralph," I interrupted him as he started to say, "please remove the word bay." As her apple cheeks turned red, her innocent lips curled sincerely. "Ralph, I need to tell you something." While my heart was beating rapidly, my lips were dry and my hands were shaking. I whispered through my teeth, "I'm listening to you, Irva. Can you add my love to your love of revolution and homeland?" While I was casting my meaningless gaze over Irva's smiling face, I threw myself into Irva's arms. I inhaled the scent emanating from her hair, which fell in waves onto her shoulders. I sacrificed this love for you. My voice shook and my eyes filled with tears. A tear fell from my eye and fell into her hair. I slowly lifted my head from his shoulder, and when our eyes met, I realized that he was also crying. I wiped the tears with the index finger of my left hand and smiled. That's love, I said, without taking my eyes off his eyes. The most beautiful love, he repeated, and as he laughed as if forgetting the whole past, I gently grasped his arm and continued my speech. Irva, it's late. Go ahead before I worry anymore. The streets are not very scary these days. Even Sasavar can come with you and take you home. Good. There is no need. Sasavar, can you take a look? I shouted behind the door. After hearing muffled conversations, Sasavar appeared at the door with all his seriousness. Will you take Iva home? Yes, Commander Ralph. Irva said goodbye to me and followed Sasavar with lazy steps. They disappeared at the end of the narrow street lit by the dead street lamp. As I stared at my watch with a yellow dial, I realized that it was approaching midnight. I couldn't understand how all those hours had passed with Irva. When I opened the door of my room, the honey-colored light of Fute's room was on. He was absorbed in his work and reading the telegrams. I entered his room without disturbing him, and when he saw me, he hurriedly stood up while throwing his cigarette into the ashtray. Come on, Pasha. Relax, Fute. Good luck. When he said, Thank you, Pasha, I could see the tired expression on his face. Is there any news from the Union and Progress Group? He fixed his despairing gaze on the table full of papers. Unfortunately, no, Pasha, but it is close, he said, and it was obvious from his tone that he did not believe this either. Anyway, we'll have to wait a little longer. Meanwhile, I'm leaving. Come to the mansion in pieces. Do not attract the attention of the occupying forces. Yes, my Pasha. As I walked out of the room and towards the creaking steps, I buried my head into my furry coat, remembering the cold outside. Greeting the uniformed soldiers sitting at the decaying table below, I opened the wooden door of the headquarters and went out. While I was placing my hands tightly in my pockets, snowflakes were falling on me as if they were flying. I could make out the speed of the falling snow under the light of the gas lamps faintly burning in front of the houses and shops. While passing through the narrow streets of Arasta Bazaar, I saw a silhouette in front of me. I squinted my eyes and tried to understand the figure approaching me, and when it got closer to me, I turned my gaze to my boots crushing the snow accumulated under my feet. He was releasing steam from his mouth, and the crunch of the snow crushed by his boots could be heard in my ears. As he passed me, we made eye contact, and the wooden-handled rifle hanging on his shoulder and his uniform, which was lighter in color than ours, caught my attention. When I turned my head back, he walked along the narrow street without paying any attention. As the steam coming out of my mouth covered the front of my wire-rimmed glasses, I whispered helplessly through my lips. Damn it! Occupying forces surrounded everywhere. When I arrived in front of the small two-story mansion, I grasped the silver key in my pocket. I quickly took off the black leather gloves I was wearing to protect myself from the cold and opened the solidly locked ornate wooden door. Under the gloomy light reflecting from the street, behind the floating dust, a smell of mold, dampness licked my nose. I grimaced, disturbed by the smell, and turned on the kerosene lamp hanging on the wall and walked to the second floor. The doors of the large hall were wide open, and a large wooden table stood in the middle of the deserted and dim room. After hanging the kerosene lamp on a suitable corner of the wall, I spread the red velvet cloth folded on one side of the table and felt the bitter smell of the dust spread in my lungs. While I was inhaling the smoke of my cigarette in the cream-colored armchair, there was a knock on the door of the mansion one after another. While my heart was pounding, I put out the cigarette on the newspaper with the erased writings and walked quickly to the door. Who's that? It is us, Commander Ralph. Their voices were so quiet that I could only hear them by leaning my ear against the door. I slowly opened the creaking door. Come. While Sasavar was trying to warm up by holding her hands to the tip of her red nose, Fute's dull facial expression remained. Sesme and Inver entered right after Sasavar and Fute. I closed the door of the mansion and locked it behind me several times. The sound of the silver metal key locking echoed in the deserted mansion. We climbed to the second floor as our boots pounded the damp wooden steps. As Sasavar takes off his dark uniform with snowflakes scattered on it. You have prepared the mansion, Ralph Pasha, he said. My thin lips under my mustache slowly curled. When we arrived early, we did something. They were all watching me with their sparkling eyes. I pulled the chair right under me and looked at my friends waiting for me around the table and continued. Come on, guys, you can sit down. Each of them sat down on their chairs, and the pale light of the oil lamp flickering in the room was reflected from the windows covered with a thin tulle. Taking deep breaths, I fixed my sharp gaze on the velvet-covered table. Clouds of ashen cigarettes were floating around the room. Friends, I would like to thank each and every one of you for taking this risk and gathering here for me at this time, I said and looked into the eyes of each of them looking at me with love. Always, Pasha, said Sesame, without taking his eyes off me. I and my dear friends are always behind you, Pasha. While interlocking my fingers on the red velvet-covered table, I continued my words with my tobacco-scented breath. We gathered in this mansion because it is the most inconspicuous place. The situation is more serious than you think. Occupying forces? Enver asked. I turned my eyes, narrowed under the pale and flickering gas lamp, to Enver. Yes, occupying forces. They surrounded Axahir from all sides, slowly infiltrated us, and before we could do anything. Seysavar stood up, pushing the chair under her, and slowly lowered her fisted hands onto the table. Let's do what is necessary, Pasha. Let's get them out of Axahir. I continued to look into his eyes that were shining with anger. There is a definitive decision from the Istanbul government. We will not touch them. While my loud voice echoed among the damp walls, I cast my determined gaze over Seysavar. I was distracted by Sesame's speech, sitting right next to me. Sometimes not everyone can tell us the right thing, Pasha. The bow-like eyebrows under his short brown hair were frowned and his forehead was wrinkled, keeping rhythm with my interlocked fingers on the red velvet-covered table. You are right, friends. The decisions of the Istanbul government are aimed at tying our hands, but we have not received any news from the Committee of Union and Progress, which we have been eagerly waiting for. I said, be patient just a little longer, grit your teeth. We will not leave this homeland to anyone, God willing. When I finished my words, the sluggish and gloomy gazes of my friends fell and wandered over the velvet-patterned tablecloth. At that moment, there was a deep silence. Only faint whispers from the gas lamp and our tense breathing could be heard. I heard the sound of boots rising from the narrow street in front of the mansion. It was getting closer and closer, and the hard steps of the boots were crushing the fresh snow. I slowly stood up, pushing the wooden chair under me, and stuck the thumb of my right hand into the edge of the shiny black belt. I opened the red velvet curtain stretched in front of the wooden-framed window in a way that would not attract attention. The occupying soldiers, who had their wooden-handled rifles on their shoulders, were walking in a certain order and in crowds. I said without taking my eyes off the window. As soon as my friends pushed the chairs under them and stood up, a strong voice echoed inside the mansion. Is it the invaders, Pasha? I heard Enver's worried but also angry voice. The house. Yes, the very ones. Are they coming to the mansion? No, they are supposedly inspecting the streets, I said, turning to Seysavar's narrowed eyes. I took the curtain from my fingertips and walked towards my friends who were watching me with worried eyes. We will be able to hold out for a few more days, but if the decision is not made, I kept silent and moistened my lips. What will we do, Pasha? Sesame raised one eyebrow and squinted her bright eyes. That's when we will fight at the cost of our lives and our rank, I replied, while my hand tightly gripped the metal handle of my revolver. While the pale and sad faces of my friends were shining, their lips curled insidiously under their thin black mustaches. Neither rank nor life. When the homeland is lost or Axahir is lost, none of it matters, Pasha. We are always with you. Just know that. Seysavar's loud and resounding voice shook inside the mansion and made the wooden corridors groan. The snow falling from outside was increasing in intensity with each passing minute, and the silence in the room was broken by the call to prayer rising from the minaret of the Grand Mosque. While the muezzin was reciting the adhan with his raspy voice, his pleasant voice echoed among the houses with colorful bay windows. Pasha, Sesame said as if distracting me. When I shook myself and came to my senses, the adhan was over. How about we send a telegram to the Committee of Union and Progress informing them of the situation? While I was moving the golden bullets in my palm, I fixed my serious gaze on Sesame. Good idea. Then the first thing in the morning will be to send a telegram to the Committee of Union and Progress. While Sesame was smiling as if he was happy to have his decision approved, We had completed all the important conversations. My eyes fell on the stone carving of the mansion, and when I caught sight of the brightly colored raki bottle standing in the corner, I continued my conversation. How about drinking raki? It's like we need to get away from boredom for a bit. While the calm expression on my face remained, my narrow gaze wandered among my friends. Okay, Ralph, Commander, said Seysavar and stood up, pushing the wooden chair under him. While we were sitting at the table with the rest, Seysavar prepared the raki and glasses with sleight of hand. Even on this winter day, we raised our glasses, steamed on the outside and filled with gum-white liquid on the inside, and repeated in unison, hoping that Axahir will be freed from enemy occupation. This was a rather pale and sad raki table. While the wood in the fireplace was crackling and burning, I wiped the sweat from my broad forehead with the back of my hand. The raki warmed my veins and made me sweat. I brushed back the strands of hair that stuck to my forehead and stood up from the table. The flickering of the gas lamp's light had increased and was about to go out. After drinking our raki and clearing the table, it was past midnight. Let's disperse, friends, without attracting any more attention. From now on, it's time to roll up our sleeves. We will never bow our necks to wrong decisions. My bright eyes wandered over my soldiers. Forgive me, Ralph Pasha, our job is risky. I turned my gaze to Sesme. He had his arms hanging down to his side and was looking at me with misty eyes. Well done, Sesme. Well done, everyone. Have a comfortable night. Their loud voices saying well done echoed inside the dilapidated mansion. I took the oil lamp hanging on the wall and went down the creaking wooden stairs. Through the glass behind the tulle curtain, the silhouette of the snow falling faintly outside could be seen. I unlocked the door, desperately burying my head into my thick coat. While the crushed stone street was covered with snow from end to end, the pale gas lamps and candles burning in the colorful houses with bay windows were extinguished. While the narrow and gloomy streets of Axahir fell into deep silence, the sound of barking dogs could be heard in the back streets. Guys, let's disperse and not attract attention. Seysavar looked into my eyes. While Enver, Fute, and Sesme were going on different paths, Seysavar and I closed the doors of the mansion and started walking. As I was swinging past the Grand Mosque, the cemetery under the sky-high pine tree in the courtyard of the historical mosque frightened me. While the snow was falling like a blizzard, it was impossible to see. While we were passing through a Rasta bazaar, the smell of tahini halva being roasted by halva sellers was reaching my nose. I heard a voice behind my ear. A loud sound of boots crushing the snow was coming right after us. Seysavar, there is someone behind us, I said through my teeth in a whisper. I am aware, Ralph Pasha. These sounds annoy me. Don't turn around, I said, keeping the serious expression on my face. I slowed my steps a little more. The sound was getting stronger and closer, and the crunching of the snow was literally echoing in my ears. I took a deep breath and blew the steam from my mouth deep into the cold air. My fingers, flushed and trembling from the cold, tightly gripped my metal-handled revolver. While leaning my back against the facade of a store, I took out the revolver from my waist with a quick hand move. Seysavar threw herself onto the snow-covered stone pavement. Standing in front of me was a Greek soldier pointing his wooden-handled rifle at me. Put down that gun in your hand, he said. As the silver-gray gloomy clouds coming out of my mouth dispersed randomly, my voice echoed in narrow spaces. Hold on, soldier, put down that gun in your hand. I won't say it again. While my eyes were squinting, I put a bullet into the barrel of the gun. You will die. You don't have to die anymore, Commander Ralph. The blue-eyed Greek soldier was trying to threaten me with his barely learned Turkish. After taking a deep breath, my nostrils opened and closed like an eagle's, and I gently touched the heated trigger with my trembling index finger. While the bullet coming out of the gun's barrel pierced the soldier's light-colored uniform and stuck into his heart, the deep calm of the snow minimized the sound of the explosion in the gun. While Seysavar kept her hateful gaze on the soldier, I gently put my revolver back, and we ran out of Arasta Bazaar. Commander Ralph, what if the corpse of this Greek bastard causes trouble for us? Let him be hungry, let him feel sorry for me, as long as he doesn't cause trouble for this beautiful Axahir, this beautiful homeland of mine. When I stopped in front of our house with bay windows, Seysavar looked at me with her meaningful gaze. Ralph Pasha, if you want, I can spend the night here. I smiled, looking into his eyes. Don't talk nonsense, Seysavar. Do you think I will be afraid? While her apple cheeks were turning red, She looked away from me with her misty gaze. No, no, I didn't mean that, Commander Ralph. I just meant for security reasons. No, no, you can go, rest too. He flicked back his curly hair, which was visible from under his thick feathered hat, and disappeared at the end of the dimly lit street, dragging his boots under his long legs through the snow. As I threw myself into the stairwell of my house, my hand reached for the revolver on my waist. I took it out where it was and gently placed it in my palm. The tip still smelled of gunpowder. Even though he was an enemy, I couldn't forget how his bloody corpse was piled on the white snow, painting the snow red. Either you were going to kill him, or he was going to kill you, and declare the real victory, I muttered through my teeth. With the kerosene lamp in my hand, I climbed up the creaking wooden steps, placed the revolver between my trembling fingers and the letter written by Irva inside the yellowing paper in the top drawer of the comedy table next to my bed. I looked at the narrow and gloomy streets of Ateş from behind the tulle curtain. The snow continued to fall, increasing its speed. I got rid of my official uniform and laid my head on the pillow. I was lost in thought as the light of the moon shining in the darkness of the night filtered through the tulle curtain and reflected on my ceiling. Just as I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, a strong hand punched the wooden door repeatedly. As my eyes widened, I quickly grabbed my revolver from my drawer and threw myself onto the stairs. From the small window right next to the door, his shadow falling on the snowy street could be seen. "Who are you?" I said without opening the door. My fingers were sweating from squeezing the handle of the gun. He waited silently for a while, then his peaceful voice echoed in my ears. "It's me, Ralph." It was Irva. I slowly opened the door while placing my gun back on my waist. I smiled, looking into his bright eyes that were looking at me through the veil he covered his face, and my dimples on my cheeks were revealed as my lips curled. "No, Irva, what wind brought you here at night?" I couldn't resist coming. "I missed you so much, Ralph." As I took her under my wide arms and hugged her, I deeply inhaled the pleasant lavender scent emanating from her hair. "Me too," I started to say. My voice was shaking and my eyes were filled with tears. "I miss you a lot too. The invaders have surrounded Ateş on all sides. Will you join this war too?" Of course. Of course I will enter. But I promise you, I will not leave your side even for a moment." Her fingers wrapped around my body, hugging me tighter every time I talked, and the tears flowing from her misty and brown eyes wet my chest. She slowly pulled her delicate and frail body back from me, threw back the veil covering her eyes with the index finger of her left hand, then placed her moist lips on my dry lips and kissed me. While I was looking at him in surprise, he shook the snowflakes off his black leather gloves, took out his white and square embroidered handkerchief from his pocket, and squeezed it between my fingers. "Keep this handkerchief," he sighed before continuing his words. "Maybe a little bit of my sin has passed on to you. Every time you smell it, you will remember me and renew our love." "Why do you talk like this, as if we will never meet again?" My eyebrows were knitted and my forehead wrinkled. "This is war, Ralph. Neither listens to love nor love. It shatters the soul and the love within the soul. This handkerchief will make our love eternal against war and cruelty." She threw herself into my arms again and started sobbing. "Irva, please don't say such things." She held my arms and looked into my eyes, wiping the tears from her misty eyes as she released her veil in front of her eyes again. "I have to go, Ralph. See you later, okay?" See you, Irva," I said, caressing her hair with my fingers. He slipped out of my arms like a cloud and ran along the snowy street. While she was trying to cover her face with her veil, she was also turning around and watching me. Despite the bitter cold outside, I still stood and watched him disappear at the end of the street. While the snow was falling like a blizzard, Irva had disappeared at the end of the street. I went inside, breathing in the scent of her handkerchief held between my fingers. When I lay back on my bed, I turned my gaze to the wooden-framed window opening into the gloomy night air and whispered, "I am in love with you. I am in love with you as if I feel it deep in my heart." Then, I closed my eyes into a deep darkness. The wooden-framed window of my room was open a few fingers wide, and while the steel-like cold coming from outside was licking my skin, the smell of incense burning sweetly on the edge of my table came to my nose. While I was pressing the typewriter keys under my fingers, my room door was knocked by a strong hand. "Come," I called out. As the door creaked open, Cesavar's silhouette appeared in the dim light of the corridor. "Come on, come, Cesavar." My Pasha, he said in a hopeless voice. His lips were slowly curling downwards and his eyes were misty. What? What happened, Saysavar? I stood up, pushing the chair under me out of fear. He slowly opened the paper he held between his fingers. Paham, the telegrams we sent to the Committee of Union and Progress have not reached so far. But how can this happen, Saysavar? They cut off our communication lines, Pasha, he said, handing the yellowing paper in his hand towards me. Actually, the Committee of Union and Progress made this decision, Pasha. I quickly grabbed the paper from his hand and whispered through my lips. Dear Commander Ralph and his team, we are honored to know that we are not alone in the Committee of Union and Progress with you. Therefore, do not sacrifice everything and leave your country, hometown, and Axahir in the hands of the enemy. Remember, this country is ours. My hands were shaking and my eyes were blurred as I read the telegram between my fingers. While I was handing the paper towards Saysavar again, there was a knock on the door again. Come, I shouted, my voice echoing through the pale walls. This time it was none other than Sesmi. My Pasha. His voice trembled and he left the official document on my desk without speaking. The newspaper under the written paper did not escape my attention. While there was a deep silence in my room, I read the article written in capital letters in the form of a headline on the newspaper. Killer Commander took a life. Judgment will. I was even more worn out when I put down the newspaper with misty eyes and read the official document right at my fingertips. As the tears flowing from my bright eyes dripped onto the straw yellow paper, I was distressed by the loss of my rank. What happened, Commander Ralph? Saysavar stroked her hair and looked into my eyes. At that moment, we came face to face with Sesmi. My rank has been reduced. Why? What was the reason, Commander? I rested my fingers on the wooden table and felt the cold coming from the wooden-framed window on my face. It was me killing the Greek, my enemy. I thought about my homeland. I thought about our future. I became a traitor. If this is really treason, well, I am the biggest traitor. Both Sesmi and Saysavar listened to what I said with rapt attention. If we are going to fight this fight ourselves for our homeland, then I am resigning, Commander Ralph. Saysavar, without changing her serious facial expression. It would not be pleasant for me to be here under the umbrella of the Istanbul government, which is protecting the enemy. I am with you until my last drop of blood in the war for homeland and freedom. While I was listening to them with tears in my eyes, Silüet and Enver entered the door. Silüet said, straightening his black mustache curled under his small nose. We are also resigning, Pasha. Long live freedom. Long live freedom. Long live the homeland. I ripped off the stars on my dark jersey and slammed them on my wooden table. Sesmi, Enver, Silüet, and Saysavar were watching me with misty eyes. After I put my stars on the table, my friends showed the same attitude. The sounds echoing in the western headquarters were piercing my ears. Outside, the phone on Silüet's desk started ringing insistently. Silüet nodded with his calm eyes, as if asking for my order. When I said, "Here you go," he came out, dragging his boots on the damp wooden floor that was about to rot. While there was a meaningless silence in the room, I turned my gaze out the wooden window. The snow was falling in flakes over Axahir. My trembling fingers reached for the radio next to me for the last time. After a few loud crackles, Bosdigan songs started playing on the radio. Frowning my eyebrows, I began to watch the ashen clouds and the snow mounds that covered this beautiful city like a quilt. The folk song sounded so beautiful to my ears that my eyes filled with tears and my cheeks turned red. I started humming, getting caught up in the words of the folk song playing on the radio. "We will die in the land where we were born," I shouted. The sounds of boots mixed with the words of the folk song, and I heard Silüet's painful voice. I could predict the news coming from him. "Ralph Pasha." "Sir." "Sir Silüet?" I turned the radio down and turned around. At that moment, Silüet looked at his feet with his shy eyes as if he had committed a great crime. "About you," he said and fell silent. It slid down desperately to the corner of his mouth. I finished Silüet's words by saying, "The Istanbul government has issued an arrest warrant against me. We are sorry. We are very sorry, Ralph Pasha. They can handcuff my wrists, but they will never be able to handcuff the love of freedom, equality, and justice in my heart." My loud voice echoed among the pale walls. When I slammed my fist on the table, my hand was shaking with anger. Also, there is no need to be sad. Friends, we will defend our homeland until our last drop of blood. with the decision taken by the Committee of Union and Progress. While my friends were watching me silently, I took my revolver, the note written by Irva, my handkerchief, and my lighter from the first compartment of the drawer next to my decorated table. I took the crumpled newspaper with the words Hukmawilla written on it and went to the blazing stove. The crackling sounds of the kindling burning inside, combined with the sweet orange color of the fire, were heard in my ears. My hand reached for the long and black iron next to the stove. As soon as I took the iron, I lifted the stove cover. The raging fire was spreading to the edges. I lit the headline of the newspaper with my lighter and threw the burning piece of paper into the stove. As the black ashes of the newspaper were scattered into the room, the sharp smell of coal licked my nose. "Look, guys. Look here," I shouted. While they all turned their serious and gloomy looks towards me, I continued my words. "This is how we will burn those who support the Sultanate. This is how we will burn those who call true patriots traitors." While the newspaper was burning hotly, I replaced the sooty cover on the end of the iron. I came to my desk by taking quick steps on the wooden floor with the boots on my feet, put the embroidered handkerchief and my note in my pocket, and then put on my coat on the iron hanger. While my friends were watching me with full attention, I continued my words. "We can't wait any longer. We can't wait any longer. We will do what is necessary." My eyebrows were knitted and my eyes were squinted. When I stood in front of the door with wooden frames, I looked at my room for the last time. I only glanced hopelessly at my typewriter, which remained silent, at the note papers hopelessly curled up on the edge of the garbage, at my window opening to the most beautiful view of Axahir, and at my messy desk. As my eyes filled with tears, I ran away from the room to hide it, went down the stairs, and went to the front of the headquarters. I sobbed and started crying, covering my palm with my hand. Being called a traitor touched me. The tears flowing from my eyes were leaving droplet marks on the snow. "Rauf Pasha," I heard Saysavar's whispering voice. While wiping my tears with the palm of my hand, I turned towards him with red eyes. "Sir Saysavar? Are you okay, Rauf Pasha?" "I'm fine. I'm fine," I repeated with a trembling voice and took a deep breath. "You will return to this headquarters again. Do not despair. You just tell us what to do. From now on it's time to do our best for our country." I grasped Saysavar's shoulder tightly with my shaky fingers, looked into her eyes with my misty gaze, and said in a determined tone, "We will meet in front of the Hukmu Arade newspaper building when it gets dark. Gather around the building. Do not attract attention. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk." The sun, floating on the horizon, slowly set between the majestic mountains. While the snow was falling as if blown from ashen clouds, the smoke of my cigarette was blowing out of the window with its wooden frames. I had my hand under my chin and was just listening to the silence that dominated the deserted streets of Axahir. Irva was never out of my mind. Her curved lips were always smiling at me. Her wavy hair was falling into foam on my chest. Our meeting time was approaching. I ran and opened the first drawer of the wooden drawer at the head of my bed and checked my revolver. It was time for me to introduce some people to the real traitors. I inhaled deeply the scent of gunpowder I smelled in the barrel of the gun. My hand involuntarily went to the matches in my pocket, and I pulled a cigarette from the silver tray and brought it to my lips. While taking deep breaths from my cigarette, I squeezed Irva's handkerchief in my palm with misty eyes. What if he never comes again? What if I never see him again? What will I do then? I said to myself. While I was crushing half a finger of my cigarette in the ashtray, I turned my nose to avoid the bitter smell, and the wooden door of my house was knocked as if it were shaking. With my heart pounding, I threw myself at the tulle-curtained bay window. As I moved my fearful gaze in front of the house, I saw Saysavar with her head bowed, just waiting for the door to open. I went down the stairs, out of breath, and opened the door. While Saysavar was rubbing her cheeks, which were red from the cold, she was trying to warm up by blowing her breath into her hand from time to time. "You came early, Saysavar," I said, while looking around the narrow street. "That's why I didn't come, Rauf Pasha. What did you come for?" My eyebrows above my flashing eyes were stretched like a spring. "Is it okay if I come in and say so, Pasha?" "Sure, come on," I said and moved away from the door. He stood in front of the cloakroom, shaking off the melted snowflakes on his dark cardigan. After closing the creaking door, I turned to Saysavar without wasting any time. "What are you going to say?" "Regarding your arrest warrant, Rauf Pasha." "What's the deal with my arrest warrant?" Saysavar's words made me uneasy. While looking at her pink cheeks, she continued her words. They assigned Colonel Tullett. Colonel Tullett will be in Axa here within 2 days at the latest. Without changing the calm expression on my face, I took deep breaths and folded my arms over my body. Of course, we will not surrender. I will never leave the Committee of Union and Progress as a rank-and-file civilian. You tell the others to be cautious, I said and fixed my wavy black hair. Really? Speaking of others, do you have a warrant for your arrest as well? He slowly lowered his gaze to the ground and let out a strong breath from his red nose. Home. Yes, Pasha, there is a decision to arrest Enver, Sesmi and Fute, including me, for abusing their office and treason to the homeland and nation. I squinted my eyes and stared at the reddening sky. While my heart was pounding, I continued my words, hiding the worried expression on my face. Don't worry, we will not surrender to anyone easily. Go ahead and inform the others. Let's meet in front of Hukmu Arada's building without attracting attention. While Seysavar wiped her filled eyes with the back of her right hand, she took lazy steps outside and disappeared in the corner of the Ulo Mosque. As it started to get dark, the gloomy weather in the sky made the inside of the house feel dim. Even though it saddened me to be away from my duty and my position, I had to do it. I quickly changed my clothes and left Commander Ralph. When I stood in front of the stained mirror, I was a true Ottoman gentleman, wearing a pale cream-colored shirt, black fabric trousers stuck to my legs, patent leather shoes the same color as the jacket on my shirt, and a dark red fez on my head. As my lips slowly curled under my curly mustache, I looked at myself from head to toe. It will take a long time to get used to this situation, Ralph, I repeated to myself, and without wasting any time, I put on my coat and went out. The dry cold coming after the snow licked my face, giving me goosebumps. I put my hands in my pockets and bowed my head. I started walking towards the newspaper building, crushing the snow under my feet. My anger was increasing with every step, and my hands and feet were shaking. As I was running, I found myself in front of Irva's house, or maybe I wanted to pass by here on purpose. I just stared at the bay window of the pale blue house for a while. Nothing but the burning gas lamp was visible behind the tulle curtain. I climbed the stone steps and stood in front of the door, breathing deeply while the silver smoke coming out of my mouth and nose mixed into the air. With my heart pounding and my lips dry with excitement, I knocked on the door. Every time I heard the sound of footsteps coming towards me, butterflies flew inside me. Before opening the door, Irva asked from behind the door. Who's that? It's me, I said without even giving my name. As the door creaked open, I saw only Irva's shadow flickering in the oil lamp. He soon put out his head, covered with tulle. After looking at me meaninglessly, he continued. Who are you? I didn't recognize it. It's me, Irva. Ralph. She freed her body from behind the door and threw herself into my arms. Without lifting her head from my body, while her hair was falling apart in foam, she asked, Why are you dressed like this? Is it a special mission or something? I was dismissed. But how does this happen? While caressing her soft hair with my shaky fingers, I continued my words. Sometimes loving your country is a betrayal, that's right. What will happen? What will you do now? His voice was shaking and his eyes were filled with beads. We will purify our country from them with the Union and Progress Party, I said and hugged him again. While her delicate body was shaking in my arms, she was sobbing deeply. Please don't do this. But Irva, you will be arrested, right? The Greek soldiers will take you with them? I tried to avoid his misty eyes. As the snowflakes were blowing on us, I continued my words, albeit forced, by wiping the tears flowing from the tip of my nose. Oh, no, I'm here. I will never be arrested. He shook his head as if trying to convince himself. Look, you've lost your duty. Can you ever leave your house? I frowned and laughed loudly. He looked at me with mocking eyes. Why are you laughing now? How could something like this happen, Irva? If we don't come out, who will come out of their warm homes? It is our duty to save this country. While she moistened her dry lips with her uvula, she made no sound and listened to me. I have to go. See you later, okay? He slowly removed his warm arms from my body. I carefully caressed the curling strands of hair that fell on my chest. She put the shawl that had fallen off her shoulders back onto her shoulders. Take care of yourself. I will always pray for you. I leaned down and kissed her apple cheeks, her face turning red as her eyes stared at her feet. After leaving him, I ran towards the newspaper building. The sun had already set, and the bright silhouette of the moon appeared in the gloomy sky, as if illuminating the night. I stood at the corner of the street, looking at the charming two-story building, pale yellow, with peeling shutters tightly drawn, red velvet curtains drawn, and lit only by a flickering kerosene lamp. Mr. Ralph. I was frightened by the whisper that came to my ear, and as my eyes scanned the surroundings uneasily, I saw Sasevar sitting on the snowy chair in front of the greengrocer right across from me. He was almost unrecognizable with his casual clothing and fez. While my eyes were looking for Fute, Sesame, and Enver, I saw them browsing through books in front of a small second-hand bookstore with dusty shelves a few shops away. After meeting the serious looks of my friends, I reached for the revolver on my waist and checked my gun. With my heart beating rapidly, I left the secluded corner I was in and stepped into the building whose sign said Hukmawilla. After me, Sasevar, Sesame, Fute, and Enver started to follow me. Holding my breath, I opened the wooden glass door of the building, and as the door creaked open, a warm air licked my face. As the crackling sound of the burning stove in the lobby reached my ears, I went inside with slow and cautious steps and closed the door. The man in the red fez, who was filling the blank page in front of him with a black typewriter on the oak table in the lobby, saw me coming, and without looking up from the typewriter, he looked at me from under his bone glasses. "Come on, who did you look at?" I shook off the melting snowflakes on my shoulder and said, "Is this the Hukmu newspaper?" "Yes, this is it," he said, increasing the nervous tone in his voice, taking off his glasses and placing them on one side of the table. "Who did you look at?" I looked at Ali Riza Effendi, but his eyebrows, stretched like a bow over his flashing eyes, frowned, and his broad forehead wrinkled. He squinted his eyes, shining in the light of the flickering gas lamp. "Ali Riza Bey is not in the building now. Come by another time." His bony fingers continued to hover over the typewriter keys. "There is an important issue, but—" "Brother, are you sick?" "From where?" I snapped, my lips curling up as I grinned at his face. He clenched his teeth together and stood up, pushing the chair under him. "Leave the building, otherwise I will inform the soldiers." "You already love the infidel soldiers, you love the betrayers," I said. Just as he was running towards me, the door of the building opened again, and my friends entered. I stood up from the armchair I was sitting on and looked into his eyes. He suddenly stood still, a look of fear spread across his face. I hit him right in the middle of his face with the back of my hand, which was about to turn red from the cold. The sound echoed in the lobby of the building, and the man stumbled and fell onto the wooden floor. While he was writhing in pain, he covered his face with his hand. While my friends were approaching me with angry looks, I drew my revolver and approached the man. "What's your name?" "Me." "Mehmet," he said while crawling on the half-muddy wooden floor. "Where's Ali Riza?" He swallowed forcefully and looked away from me. Believe me, Mr. Ali Riza is not here today. He never came to the newspaper." His red fez fell from his head and rolled next to the crackling stove, while his bright, side-combed hair was gathered in the middle of his head. "Did he go in search of the Sultanate?" While Sasevar's voice echoed in the lobby of the building, two men came running down from above. After their hands went to their waists, they pulled guns on us. Sesame and Fute reacted in the same way without wasting any time. While the gunshots were echoing in my ears, the bitter smell of gunpowder hit my nose. While the two men from earlier were lying on the ground covered in blood, beads of sweat dripped from Mehmet's broad forehead. "How can you, as a newspaper, write dirty slanders about me? How dare you?" I exclaimed, while my trembling gaze wandered over the calm face of Ali Riza, whose black and white photograph hung on the wall. "We did the right thing. You are murderers who have lost their conscience." I turned my gaze to Mehmet lying on the ground. His black eyebrows were frowning while his neatly combed hair was ruined. I pointed the gun in my hand, and the gun exploded with a strong orange blast from its tip. While the smell of gunpowder mixed with the smell of rotten wood licked my nose, blood from Mehmet's head splashed on the moldy walls. Breathing heavily, I climbed the steps without even looking back. The dim lights of the gas lamps burning between the floors illuminated the building, although they flickered from time to time. When I went upstairs, there was no one there. My eyes fell on the door in front of me, with its embroidered doors tightly closed and Ali Riza written on the side. I put the bullet into the barrel of my revolver and leaned against the door. When I slowly lowered the doorknob, The window with its open shutters turned the empty chair. Day 1. In the evening. Hello, Irva. The sun was trying to seep into my room through the tulle curtains. Ash-colored clouds still dominated the sky as stacks of them hit my wooden table. I was alone, as always, with myself, listening to my own voice, filling the empty pages in front of me. The absence of you stuck in the middle of my heart like a powerful dagger and brought tears to my eyes. It hurt me so much that you were not with me in the room of my house, which embraced me in these cold days and inspired me to write. Love means thinking about her even when you die. Even if you know you can't be with her, Grandma Paloma used to say. That's how I loved you. You will always live in the depths of my heart. I left my novel unfinished in the hotel room and picked up my pen. Your longing brought tears to my eyes and squeezed my heart. I don't know what to write. My longing for you, my love, my resentment, my anger. I don't know which one to write about. My only crime was loving my country. Maybe my only crime was loving you to death. Maybe I don't know either. We will make a revolution. We will light these sparks all over the country with the real fire in our hearts. I miss your brown hair flowing in foam on my shoulders, your eyes squinting while looking at me, your nose red from the cold, and the handkerchief with your scent on it so much that there is no way to describe it. While looking at the gloomy sky on moonless nights, I talked to your dream for a long time. These letters may be longer than your notes, but I believe you will keep them for a lifetime. My dreams, ideas, future, and ideals are falling apart along with my body. Sometimes I want to take the revolver waiting for me in my drawer and end my life, but I know that soldiers will shoot me as a traitor on a deserted street of Ateş. Don't worry, Ralph hasn't lost anything from his crazy heart. The sad end of this crazy heart fighting between revolution and love is near, but I can't accept it. I don't want to die without seeing you, without looking into your eyes. My rank was reduced, but it was as if thousands of stars were stuck in my heart. Nothing stood in my way. I would just have to be a little ruthless. While the freezing cold hit our faces like a slap, the sweat that accumulated on our foreheads while running would warm us. I am far from everything. Everything is far from me. Your handkerchief washed with your beautiful scent, and the note from your hands are with me. As if I am alive for them, as if they are the only thing connecting me to this life. Don't be sad. Your love is more burning than the revolution, Ralph. I was distracted by what Grandma Paloma said. As I squeezed the pen in my palm, I felt the sweat seeping through my fingers. Maybe I will never see him. Maybe he will always be with you. Her wavy white hair, freed from her writing, covered her wrinkled forehead. How will it be? Your love has never lost you. Where does this despair come from? I will be a prisoner of the bullet coming out of the barrel of a gun. They will handcuff my arm. They will imprison my soul in a dark dungeon. I will always worry about being without you, not about my death. While Grandma Paloma looked at me with pitiful eyes, the tears that fell from my eyes dripped onto the paper. Part 2. The wind blowing through the open blinds in the empty room was licking my face. I felt a strong hand on my shoulder and a tired breath on my neck. When I turned back with concern, Saysavar was looking at me with her misty eyes. Ralph Pasha, there is no Ali Riza, he said, maintaining the calmness in his voice. I got out from under Saysavar's fingers and started to walk towards the table in front of me. Handwritten letters, scattered notes, newspapers, and magazines were scattered haphazardly on the table. My eyes fell on the telegrams lying under a black-covered file. I continued my words, looking at Saysavar with excitement. Telegrams. What happened to the telegrams, Pasha? I slammed my fisted fingers on the table with all my strength. The one who cut off the communication lines is Ali Riza himself. All the telegrams that will go to the headquarters, that is, send us information, are here, I said, out of breath. I lifted the cover of the black file and took all the telegrams from there. At that moment, my other friends ran into the room we were in with their boots on the wooden floor. While I was trying to explain, Timmy, Fute said, "What are they, Pasha?" He was left incomplete with his question. Telegrams, Fute, telegrams from the Committee of Union and Progress, which could not be delivered to us. Fute looked around the room with narrowed eyes. While Fute remained silent, Enver muttered with all his anger under his curled mustache. These are the Aksihir legs of the Istanbul government, Pasha. Unless these diseased arms are cut off, our homeland will be lost. You are right. You are so right, Enver. I stroked my neatly combed shiny black hair as I shook my head. My eyes wandered around the room as I angrily placed the revolver in my hand on my waist. I shuffled my feet and stood in front of the window with the shutters open. The streets of Aksahir were seen more clearly from here. The shopkeeper trying to illuminate the window with the dim light of the gas lamp in the dark of the night, the boy trying to sell the newspapers full of agendas in his hand, the man selling the warming boza on winter days caught my eye. Then I turned around and walked to the door. My friends' faces were shadowed. They continued to stare at me without changing the calm expression on their faces. Without making a fuss, I went down the creaking steps. While the men lying on the ground filled the lobby, the crackling of the loudly burning stove involuntarily reached my ears. Jumping over Mehmet, the writer of the newspaper, who was lying on the ground covered in blood, I stood at the black typewriter and quickly pulled out the paper and started reading. The free days of Aksahir and the homeland are approaching. Saysavar, hearing me reading aloud, continued his words with his angry eyes. Come on from there. Come, hand over your homeland to the British and Greeks, and then you'll have free days. The heat of the burning stove in the lobby burned my face. I wiped the sweat beads from my cheeks to my neck with the back of my hand and threw the crumpled paper into the burning stove. I buried my head in my fuzzy-edged cardigan, and when I turned off the pale oil lamp burning on the wall, the newspaper's lobby was in pitch darkness. I slowly opened the door and a steely cold licked my skin. I had goosebumps and felt cold. Masses of snow accumulated on the edges of the stone pavements, making it difficult for us to walk. While shopkeepers were lowering the shutters of their shops, women with veiled faces were trying to get home. The weather was getting darker and the cold was evident. The evening call to prayer echoed from the minaret of the Grand Mosque, and a few people wearing red fezzes ran to the mosque, ignoring the snow on the ground. As I put my hands in my pockets and walked calmly, I was distracted by Sesmi's voice. What will happen to the bodies, Rauf Pasha? Pro-Sultanist Ali Riza will understand that this is a threat. As my voice grew louder, my bright eyes under my arched eyebrows narrowed. Of course my Pasha will understand, but it only takes one of his articles in the Hukmu Irade newspaper to arouse the public and unleash it on us. Well, Ali Riza will do this too, Saysavar continued. I watched them watching me in astonishment. Without changing the calm and cold expression on my face, I clenched my fingers, flushed and trembling from the cold, into fists and let out a strong breath accompanied by smoke. If he trusts his newspaper, to what day do we, as the Committee of Union and Progress, stand? We will cheer every corner of Aksahir and explain that no one can save this beautiful country other than the sovereignty of the people. The warmth in the hearts of the people will erase the ink from a helpless newspaper. The expression on my friends' faces changed, and they smiled with a confident expression. Enver said decisively while rubbing his curled mustache, white from the snow. Then we will continue our struggle, he said. Our struggle will be for this country. We will kill if necessary. We will die if necessary. There is no other way out. As long as this life is in this body, I cannot tie my hands and wait for the decisions to come from the Istanbul government. I will ignore those who ignore me. Everything will be for my country. I wanted to shout these words, but the British soldiers standing on the sidewalk corners prevented me from doing so. May God help us, Pasha, said Silüet, without taking his harsh gaze off me. Amen, amen, Silüet. After taking a last look at the newspaper building with its shutters closed, I stepped further down the street. The orange lights shining from the sides of the street cast the silhouettes of snowflakes onto the stone pavements. Let's disperse, I added. My friends, checking the guns on their waists, disappeared in the deserted and dark corners of the narrow streets. With hopeless eyes shining under the dying moonlight, I started to walk towards my house. It was as if I had always felt her absence in my heart since I met Erva. I felt dead every moment she was not with me. Was this what love was? Was it to make love immortal? While I was muttering to myself, I was trying to make up for her lack by imagining her brown hair falling foamy over her shoulders. While the snow was falling on me as if it were blowing on me, I stood in front of my house with red bay windows and watched the street with misty eyes. British guards passed by with rifles hanging around their necks. Without making a fuss, I walked up the snow-covered stairs and inserted the key into the door, and as I turned it once, I felt warm breath on the back of my neck. He came close to me by trampling the snow and stood right behind me, my eyebrows knitted and my forehead wrinkled. When I opened the door and turned around out of the corner of my eye, he was watching me in his dark green uniform, stretching his lips that resembled a thin line under his mustache that harmonized with his well-formed face. and smoke was coming out of his mouth and nose with every breath he took. Despite his middle age, the wrinkles on his face made him look younger. "Who are you? What are you doing in front of my house?" My hand involuntarily moved to the revolver on my waist. My eyes were flashing and my gaze became serious. As if to annoy me, his cold dry lips curled up and he stroked his mustache and laughed with his voice thick with cigarettes. "Why are you laughing? Who are you?" I said, pulling the revolver on my waist towards the man. Even though he was wearing a Turkish military uniform, I had never seen him at the Western headquarters. "Tullet." "I am Commander Tullet," he repeated, without breaking the smiling expression on his face. Despite the cold outside, my fingers were sweaty from gripping the handle of the gun. I did not lower the gun. I continued my speech by clenching my teeth tightly. "I mean, the commander who will arrest me." "No, you're wrong. There is no child in front of you." As my voice echoed on the snowy street, the silhouette of Tullet holding his hand caught my attention. When he bowed his head, his serious face turned into a silhouette. I want to arrest you." "Ralph, Commander." My fingers loosened from the grip of the gun. "Yes, the arrest warrant was given to me by the Istanbul government, but I cannot handcuff your hands in this glorious struggle for our homeland. I stand on the path of union and progress, opposing the entire Sultanate. I am with you, Ralph Pasha." As the dry cold licked my skin, my eyes misted. I slowly put my revolver on my waist and looked at Tullet, who was bowing respectfully in front of me in his uniform. What is that in your hand?" He held a piece of dark green fabric with both hands, held it out towards me, and added, "Your uniform, my Pasha, is the uniform that has accompanied your heroic body all these years. I brought you what belongs to you." I went down the steps with excitement, hugged my uniform, and buried my head in it. My naive body was left in sobs as the tears flowing from my eyes soaked the dark green linen fabric. For a while, I shed tears on my uniform, ignoring the cold outside. A shaky and bony hand touched my shoulder. "Are you okay, Ralph Pasha?" "I'm fine." "I'm fine, Tullet," I said, wiping my tears with the heel of my hand. As I took my uniform from Tullet's hand, I was still shedding tears, while Tullet was looking around with suspicious and afraid eyes. I said, "I swear by this uniform that we will rejuvenate this country, and we will never leave the love of the sea to the rain. With your permission, I will go, Pasha. I will come back to you tomorrow. There are British and Greek patrols everywhere. Don't stay here any longer. Go inside," he said. Then his eyes under his arched eyebrows wandered around the bay window of my house. He started to walk towards the other end of the snowy street, releasing smoke from his mouth and nose. "Tullet," I shouted after him, and he looked at me with his sparkling eyes over his shoulder covered with snowflakes. "Here you go, Pasha. Thank you for everything." He smiled with his lips curling, revealing his satisfaction. "What do you mean, Pasha? It is an honor to be with you." He crushed the snow under his feet with his boots and disappeared under the pale street lamp. I looked with misty eyes at my uniform, which was lying on my shaky fingers. I felt cold as I inhaled the scent on it, so I ran inside and sat by the fireplace. When I put my uniform on the cream-colored armchair opposite me, I was trying to warm up with the crackling fire. I rubbed my hands while the gas lamp was burning dimly, almost extinguished. While I was watching the snow fall through the bay window covered with a tulle curtain, I slowly sat up from my chair and felt an uncomfortable tightness in my chest. I couldn't swallow and breathed hard, picked up the piece of green linen fabric from where it was like a baby, and stepped towards the wooden nightstand next to my bed. The moonlight hitting the narrow and gloomy streets of Aksahir was leaking through the tulle curtains and onto my snow-white sheets. I sat on the edge of my bed, blocking out the gloomy light. While my eyes were misting, I slowly opened the creaking drawer, and while the smell of straw yellow note paper was reaching my nose, I took Irva's handkerchief in my hand. I brought it to my nose and inhaled its scent deeply. I could not understand what had happened to me. I wasn't in my right mind. Maybe love meant thinking about her eyes and being happy even in the middle of a bitter war. I folded the snow-white and embroidered handkerchief with great care, placed it on my uniform, and put both of them in the drawer. I slowly closed the creaking wooden drawer, as if I didn't want to hurt Irva inside the drawer. "I found you in the middle of pain. I don't want to erase you from my heart at once," I whispered through my teeth and laid my tired body on my soft bed. My eyelids closed in endless darkness, and I fell into a deep sleep with the crackling sounds coming from the fireplace on a cold, snowy Axahir night. While the snow was falling on Axahir, it trapped all the noise and remained at the forefront with its beauty. A strong orange light filtered in through my windows, whose tulle curtains were tightly closed. While I was squinting my closed eyes and feeling the sweat running down my forehead, a loud explosion shook the whole house along with my body. My ears were ringing as painful screams rose, and ashen smoke was covering everywhere. I had fallen off my bed and hit my knees on the hard wooden floor of my house. My headache joined the ringing in my ears. I forced my eyes open and burst into coughing. When I stood up, the fires all around me were burning my misty eyes. "Bomb," I whispered through my dry lips. As soon as I got over the shock, I looked around me carefully. There was no damage to my house. As I ran to the window, I saw that many houses on the street were damaged. The flying pieces burst into flames on the white snow. I coughed one last time, feeling the ashy smoke rising in my lungs. "Irva," I whispered again. At that moment, the armored jeeps of the British and Greeks were roaring past, the people writhing in pain as if nothing had happened. I got dressed and ran downstairs. When I opened the wooden door, people were desperately crying over their ruined houses. While my heart was pounding, I looked behind the jeeps with my frowning eyes. Gone, our home, our hopes, our only home are gone. I heard a tearful voice, and when I turned my misty eyes back, a middle-aged man was sobbing. I held her shoulder and wiped her tears with the back of my hand. I wanted to say a few words, ignoring the cold outside, but the words got stuck in my throat. "Fear. Don't be afraid. Axahir will blossom again in our hands. We will laugh in these streets again. But as long as you are patient and strong, do not surrender yourself. Resist with all your strength. They are strong. They have powerful weapons, Mr. Ralph. Is it that easy to resist?" He looked at me with a mocking look from under his eyes. I forced my trembling fingers over his heart and continued. "Look, you have a heart too. Of course, there will be a light in every darkness." Then I turned quickly and ran with staggering steps, not knowing where I was going. I saw an elegant woman's body lying lifeless under the stone gutter extending from the corner of the bay-windowed houses where two narrow streets intersected to the crushed stone street. Her wavy brown hair was scattered on the snow with the brutal blackness of gunpowder, and her hands and feet were hopelessly spread out. The embroidered dress covering her body made her appear as a silhouette at the end of the gloomy street. Please, Irva, don't do this to me." I pushed the people around me and sat next to the female body lying on the ground. As I was about to slowly turn the body and open the gauze, a loud sound echoed in my ears. I turned my head left and right, and my eyes felt like they were going to close. Sweat was streaming down my forehead and flowing down to my neck, and as the sound was getting louder, I woke up from my bed, out of breath. While my confused gaze was wandering around the bay window with its curtains closed, I was still under the influence of the dream I had seen. My heart was pounding out of its place. The sound echoing mercilessly in my ears was my door knocking insistently. I stood up, picking up the snow-white sheet that had accumulated at my feet, and as I was going down the creaking steps, I said something to the person who had been waiting for me for a long time. I came. When I opened the door, Sesavar was breathing into her hands, which she held to the tip of her red nose, and was shaking. When he saw me in front of him, he straightened up and nodded in greeting, the tips of his curled mustache turning white with frost. "Have a good day, Ralph Pasha." "Good morning to you too, Sesavar," I said, without breaking the smile on my face. But the smile on Sesavar's face suddenly gave way to a calm facial expression, and she looked me up and down with sad eyes. "You have run out of fuel, Ralph Pasha. Your face has turned chalky. Are you okay?" I moved my glazed gaze to my feet and scratched my wrinkled mustache with the index finger of my right hand for a while. It's just a nightmare, Sesavar. Come on, don't stand there. Wait inside until I get ready." He came in as if he was pleased with what I said, and his lips under his thin mustache curled cheerfully. Sitting on the pale-colored armchairs under the steps, she intertwined her fingers and tried to warm up. While Sesavar was sitting on the armchair, I quickly climbed up and opened the drawer with uneasy eyes. My mind has been obsessed with Irva since I woke up. Both my uniform and Irva's handkerchief were in the drawer. Oh, thank God. After closing the drawer tightly, I went downstairs without wasting any time. "Come on, Sesavar. let's go out. He jumped out of his seat with excitement. He opened the door and jumped out, and I put on my bright black boots and went out. The snow had stopped, but I shivered inside as the dry cold licked my face. As Cesar and I walked towards the end of the street, I whispered in a voice that was not very strong, with smoke coming out of my mouth. He's here. He turned his eyes, bright with cold, towards me, as if trying to understand what was happening. Who came? Rauf Pasha? The commander who will arrest me is Tullet. After I finished my words, his eyes popped out of his head. He stopped where he was and caressed his cheeks as red as apples with his bony fingers. So was Rauf Pasha in Aksahir? Yes. He is in Aksahir now. His anxious eyes scanned the street with fear. Then why do we travel so freely, Pasha? Let's hide. Don't stop like this. He was looking at me with his misty eyes and was crushing the snow under his boots with fear. I saw them. I had the opportunity to talk to him last night. My relaxed attitude worried him. He continued to look at my face with meaningless eyes. How is it, Rauf Pasha? I continued walking silently for a while, looking with my absent-minded eyes at the tracks my feet made in the snow, taking deep breaths from time to time. As I breathed, the tip of my nose became red and burning. Yes, he showed up at my door alone last night. Alone, Cesar completed me. Alone. I was scared at first, and when he gave his name, I was about to agree to be arrested. I smiled, turning my gaze to the clear blue sky with my hands in my pockets. He brought my uniform and gave it to me. The one you wore on duty, Pasha? Yes, that one. Then he said to me, don't be afraid. I will not arrest you. I can handcuff your wrists, but I cannot handcuff your heart. I am with you. I am from the Committee of Union and Progress. Cesar was listening with all her attention to me. Isn't he trying to deceive us, Pasha? I don't think so, Cesar. If he was going to arrest him, he would have arrested him already. He frowned and thought with calm eyes. I don't have much confidence, Rauf Pasha. This Istanbul government may have thought of everything. I lowered my gaze to the ground as if I agreed with what he said. But instead of saying what was on my mind, I put a fake smile on my lips and continued my words. We will trust Tullet. Don't worry. When we reached the end of the street, I stopped and started talking to the other end of the street with my glazed eyes. Cesar, you go to the mansion. I'm coming. Where to, Pasha? I have work to do. I'll be at the mansion before it's too late. He looked at me with disapproving eyes. Okay, Rauf Pasha, but please be careful. Saying don't worry, I turned around and shouted after Cesar as I started to walk. Oh, before I forget, if Tullet comes to the mansion, take him too. While nodding his head as if to say yes, he disappeared among the houses with bay windows. As I approached Erva's house with rapid steps, my excitement to see her was increasing. When I saw the British soldiers coming out of the shop next to me, my hand involuntarily reached for my revolver. They walked away after watching me with serious eyes from under their caps. When I arrived in front of Erva's house, I took quick breaths and tried to calm myself down. After placing the revolver on my waist, the pistol grip of which was visible, I climbed the stone steps and gathered all my courage and knocked on the door. I waited silently for a while, and just as I was about to start feeling worried, I heard the creak of the wooden steps. As the wooden door creaked open, Erva spoke in her weak voice without taking her head out of the door. Who are you? It's me. It's me, Erva, Rauf, I said with pleasure. R.A. Rauf, I wasn't expecting you at all, he said, opening the door and throwing his delicate body into my arms. While burying my head in his neck, I deeply inhaled the scent of his hair flowing foamily on his shoulder. This is what love is like. It appears before you when you least expect it, at an unexpected time, and you are confused about what to do. Do you have any choice other than being addicted to her smiles? Of course not. While he was caressing my arms, he was looking into my sparkling eyes with his smiling eyes. It would be better if it was just her smile. You would be completely dependent on her heart. I watched Erva as if time stood still. Come on, get something to eat and let's have something hot to drink. What do you say? Isn't it dangerous for you? My lips curled under my mustache. It won't. This heart needs you. Wait for me here. Will I get cold? He said and jumped inside like a gazelle. Soon, she appeared from behind the open ornate wooden door. Let's go, Rauf. Her curved lips, which complemented her small nose, smiled cheerfully. At that moment, I was smiling, forgetting the painful state of my homeland. And every time I looked at it, my heart was pounding. As we walked side by side with quick steps, I felt warmth between my fingers. When I moved my gaze down without showing it, Irva's dry and bony fingers grasped my hand. I reacted the same way and continued. Your hand. Let your hand be warm. You were so kind, he whispered, interlocking my fingers tightly between his, as we walked down the narrow street covered with white snow like a quilt. We stopped in front of a cute patisserie whose windows were decorated with colorful candies. Turning my gaze to him. How about here? I asked. That would be nice. He grabbed my wrist and pulled me. Seeing Irva happy made me happy too. When I opened the door of the patisserie, the bell on the door echoed in my ear. Behind the marble counter, a fat man with an apron tied to his front, hair thinning in the middle of his head, and the buttons of his shirt barely fastened on his belly, turned to us, shaking the flour from his ruddy cheeks. Here you go. Welcome, sir. Welcome. Do you have any free seats? Of course. Go to the window, he said, pointing with his sausage-like fingers to the table surrounded by iron-legged chairs at the edge of the ornate glass display case. We walked to the table, shaking our heads at the chubby man. After pulling out Irva's chair and giving her space, I sat down on the chair opposite her. The chubby man, breathing heavily, walked around the marble counter and took off his flour-soaked apron and came to us. What will you buy, sir? Said. At that moment, the pleasant aroma of the orchid flower mixed with the smell of boiling milk entered my nose, and I inhaled the scent deeply and added, Oh, it's delicious. We'll buy some salad with lots of cinnamon. I shyly took my eyes off the man and turned to Irva. Well? I didn't ask you, but you drink salad, right? I would faint in this freezing cold winter sky, he said, without ever losing the smile on his face. As the chubby man stepped into the golden salad bowl, leaving a pleasant orchid scent behind, I turned my gaze to Irva again. You wouldn't normally come by me in the morning, but what's the matter? With a quick sleight of hand, I grabbed his red hands lying on the table. I continued speaking, looking into his sparkling eyes under his eyebrows stretched like a bow. Say, I saw you in my dream. My voice was shaking and my eyes were misty. Me? A deep happiness was evident in his astonished eyes. How did you see? I couldn't swallow when I asked. I moistened my dry lips with my tongue. The occupation forces were declaring war on us, the Committee of Union and Progress. I remained silent and turned my meaningful gaze from the window display to the snow-covered street. So, you were dying, Irva, and this affected me. I came to see you as soon as I got out of bed, to look into your eyes, to make sure of your love. While his cotton-like hands caressed my fingers, my hand almost melted in his palms. I inhaled the lavender scent emanating from her skin. I will never stop loving both you and Ateş, Ralph. I'm glad I fell in love with you. At this time, you passed in front of me by hiding all the evil. You brought light to my life with your eyes. I knew a heroic commander who wrote a novel. While clenching my teeth together, I bent my eyes forward and sobbed inwardly, shedding a few drops of tears. What a commander! I said sarcastically. The star torn from your collar does not mean anything, Ralph. Your heart right here still beats for your beautiful homeland. For Ateş, you are still a heroic commander, he said, placing his shaky fingers tightly over my heart. Is it really so? I added in an unsure tone. At that moment, when I turned my gaze back to the glass showcase, the snow continued to fall in flakes on the crushed stone streets of Ateş. Of course, I want to drink this hot salad with you. After our homeland, Ateş, is liberated from the hands of these enemies, while your books are standing in a corner. As my eyes misted, I covered my mouth with my fingers and tried hard not to cry. I love you, Irva, like being caught in a storm in the middle of the sea. I love you even if we are at war. Another crime of this crazy unionist heart of mine is to love you, I said and hugged him tightly. While breathing his scent into my lungs, he spoke through his teeth. Ralph. Sir Ava? Our salads are getting cold, he said, smiling. As I slowly left his arms, I felt the happiness of looking into his eyes. I had already forgotten the painful nightmare I had. While feeling the scent of her hair in my nose, I sipped the salad that smelled sweetly of orchids. My mind was focused on my friends waiting for me at the mansion. Should we get up, Irva? After we finished our salad, I repeated it in a mournful voice. Stay. Let's get up. You have work to do after all. His gaze was misty and his eyebrows were a curtain over his eyes. I stood up by pushing the iron-legged chair under me and helped Irva. I stepped towards the man kneading the dough under his chubby fingers. Good luck. Our debt is as follows, I said, and left the brightly colored coins I took out of my pocket on the marble counter. As he said, Bon appetit, sir. We will wait again. His eyes lifted from the dough in front of him. He looked at me and froze. Did you make him look like someone? Well, he stammered, unable to swallow. Aren't you Commander Ralph? The one who taught the pro-sultanist Ali Riza a lesson, he said, then looked me up and down with his sparkling eyes. Home. Yes. I'll kiss you on the forehead, son, if you allow. Una came around us from behind the counter, wiping her plump and gnarled hands covered in dough on the snow-white apron in front of her. Before I could say, Astagfirullah, sir, his moist lips kissed my forehead, his hands tightly grasped my arms and pulled them to himself. Well done, son, well done. I'm proud of you. This country will be saved not by those who sell it for their own benefit, but by those who sacrifice their lives for their love, he said. These words of yours made me happy at this time, sir. I'm with you, Commander. Die so I can die. His lips, bruised from cigarettes under his thick mustache, curled cheerfully. Good luck, sir. Our only request from you is that you do not fall into the trap of any sultanist. Don't worry, Ralph Pasha. We know who is who. After saying, I trust the heroic heart of you Unionists in this bad time of the state, he turned around and took the coins from the marble counter and put them back in my pocket. But we don't often see a warm salab for Ralph Bey, who is fighting for us in this cold. Good then. When I opened the iron door of the shop, a dry cold licked my face and snowflakes scattered on my thick cardigan. We walked on the snow-covered street silently for a while. While I heard the crunch of the snow crushing under our feet, I watched Irva's hair waving on her shoulders from the corner of my eye. He spoke as if mumbling through his teeth. I will miss you so much. As my eyebrows knitted, my broad forehead wrinkled. Why do you sound like you're saying goodbye like that? What? I don't know. After all, we are getting ready to enter a war and fire. You never know. His voice was trembling as he spoke. Don't say that. No worries. We will come out with success, Irva. Both Axahir and our homeland will be saved. Don't worry. As he exhaled, the leaden vapors coming out of his mouth dispersed in the cold air. On the other hand, we need to speak the truth, Ralph. Life is based on truth. If there is something more important than our love, it is this country. We will die if necessary. Dying? Where did that come from? What does your mouth say? His face was shadowed as he lowered his sad and calm gaze to the ground. Yes, we will put up a fight, but don't think badly. Our seeds of love have been planted in the ground, waiting to sprout, I said, holding her fingers, which were red from the cold, with a delicate move. Our love was planted on this land. When we become prosperous, it will become a plane tree. Then I will look into your eyes to my heart's content. I will hug you tightly, never to be separated again, he said, his lips curling under his small nose and his prominent cheeks turning red. Oh, well, hope saves a love, as long as you want it, I said. Then I remained silent and looked into his eyes for a while. Come in, don't be cold anymore. While her brightly colored hair was falling into foam on my shoulders, and I was breathing in the scent of her hair, she left me, climbed the stone steps of her house and entered. I stood there for a while, watching the facade of his house, and as my steps pulled me back, I walked down the snow-covered street towards the mansion. As I turned the corner of the Ulu Mosque, I saw a silhouette approaching the building at the other end of the street. He was approaching with smooth steps, his hands in his pockets, his heart-covered head bowed forward. We approached the building in silence, with flakes of snow blowing onto our thick coats. As soon as Silhouette took his hands out of his pockets and raised his heart-covered head, I realized that this person was Tullet, and I felt unnecessary anxiety. After he recognized me in the falling snow, he stopped in front of the wooden door and started waiting for me as if he was protecting his respect. He greeted me by rubbing his cold red nose with his fingers as he took his hands out of his pockets. Good morning, Tullet. Good morning, Ralph Pasha. I put my shaky fingers on his shoulder and looked into his eyes. Let's go inside. Don't get cold anymore. I knocked on the door with strong fists. A pair of boots rushed towards the door, and the wooden door creaked open. I saw Enver's lips curling under his mustache, and he slowly walked away from the door. Come on, Pasha. We were waiting for you too. When we entered the ground floor of the mansion, shivering from the cold, we shook off the snow that accumulated on us. Enver slowly closed the door behind us and greeted us. "Welcome, Pasha." "Welcome, Enver." Enver placed his wire-rimmed glasses on his nose with the index finger of his right hand. "Who is Sir, Pasha?" Tullet, I said in a shy voice. Tullet. Tullet, my Pasha? He turned his meaningless gaze towards Tullet while his face was shadowed. "Yes, Tullet," I said, maintaining my calm. "But Pasha, he is the person assigned to arrest you." He remained silent for a while and looked Tullet up and down. "I know, such a responsibility has been placed on your shoulders. However, instead of listening to the Istanbul government and being pro-Sultan, Tullet chose to share his unionist heart with us." "I wish you had told me this before, Rauf Pasha," he said, but his calm gaze was still on Tullet. When Saysavar saw us coming, she leaned over the wooden banisters of the stairs and said, "Enver, don't keep Rauf Pasha and Tullet there," he said. When we quickly walked upstairs, my team was gathered around the table with a red velvet tablecloth. As I stepped inside, the smell of humidity and dampness in the room licked my nose. When Sesmi and Fute saw me coming, they stood up by pushing the chairs under them. "Hello, friends." "Hello, Pasha," they added in unison. Without changing the calm expression on my face, I sat down on the wooden chair and told them to sit. While their eyebrows were furrowed, their sweaty foreheads were wrinkled by the fire coming from the wood-burning fireplace. "Sit down, friends, there are important matters." "Is there any new news, Pasha?" As I crossed my fingers, bony and red with cold, on my velvet-covered table, I turned my gaze to Saysavar. "Yes, there is news, but it is not very good news, at least from our perspective." "What? What happened, Pasha?" "The telegram came, Fute, from the Committee of Union and Progress." "What does it say, Pasha?" "Friends, before that, I want to touch on one more issue." They all became silent and started listening to me. "You know, we no longer have a rank. The supporters of the Sultanate have already declared us traitors. We have to put aside official conversations among ourselves." "How so, Rauf Pasha?" "The words Pasha and Commander will no longer be used. I am not your commander. I am a unionist comrade with a love of homeland and revolution in his heart." But Saysavar started to rebel. "No, Saysavar. Let's use the word Bey at most." My determined eyes wandered over the silhouettes of my friends, their faces shining in the light of the kerosene lamp. "Understood." "Well, now let's get to the main topic," I said, making the expression on my face serious. While the bitter smell coming from the gas lamp brought tears to my eyes, I continued speaking. "The situation is very serious. Ali Riza continues to make headlines about us in the Hukmu Irade newspaper. Did he write about the incident the other day? His only concern is to please the Istanbul government. Of course he will write, with the title Killer Patriots," I said, and through the straw-leaf newspaper I found at the patisserie on the table. "These. How can they stand by and watch our country invade day by day? This cannot be the conscience of a patriot. I wonder what they will do when we purge the enemy? They will not be alive until then. They will not be able to wake up to a happy morning by trying to pollute the bright future of this country." While I was looking at Fute from head to toe, I was distracted by Sesmi's voice. "Perhaps death will remain a great blessing for these criminals who have lost their love of their homeland." I swallowed hard as I rolled my eyes towards the wooden-framed window. Sesmi frowned, waiting for my answer. "Home. Yes, death will be a blessing to them, but we are not an enemy. We cannot follow a policy of killing. The aim of the Committee of Union and Progress is to follow a gentle yet patriotic path." "You are right," Sesmi, "but our priority is to give the right to speak to the nation that has shouldered the fatigue of these years. If we cannot understand the nation, we can neither save Aksahir nor this country." While the eyebrows of my friends, who were listening attentively to what I was talking about, were slowly rising, their faces were shadowed and their gazes were calm. There was a deep silence for a while I listened to the sound of the sizzling fire coming from the kerosene lamp. While everyone was sitting with their fingers crossed on the table, my hand quickly reached into the inner pocket of my cashmere coat. I placed the bright red flag with the crescent and star embroidered on it and my revolver on the table. "So what was the important thing you had to tell us, Mr. Rauf?" While Saysavar was experiencing the tension of speaking differently to me, I stood up, pushing the chair under me, and walked around the table. "About the telegram from the Committee of Union and Progress. It came from Mustafa Kemal, who presided over this society, I repeated while tying my hands behind my back. Tullet broke his silence at the table and spoke with his weak voice. Can you share it with us, Pasha? Of course I will share, I said, carefully taking out the folded paper from my pocket, pushing the wire-rimmed glasses that had fallen under my nose back up to my nose, and took a look at the randomly scattered letters on the paper. Hello, friends. We are proud to be fighting shoulder to shoulder with you in the difficult times of our country. Yes, we will cry, we will be sad. This country is ours with all its beauties. We are the people who have been crying and tired for years. There are dozens of hearts and dozens of thoughts that we need to regain. I trust Axie here and wish you luck. Mustafa Kemal. When I finished the text, my eyes were sparkling. The paper slipped through my fingers and fell onto the velvet table. Mustafa Kemal. I don't know him, but may God be pleased with him. May God forgive him to the nation. Enver turned his sorrowful gaze to the snow-falling sky and muttered through his teeth. Amine, we said in unison. While the gloomy light of the sun was filtering through the tulle curtains accompanied by dusty bundles into the large room of the mansion, the gas lamps hanging on the wall were burning with their last power. I stood up, resisting the smell of rotten dampness spreading through the damp boards. I invite you to stand up, friends. As my loud voice echoed among the pale walls, they all stood up and said, We will swear to this banner. They all slowly placed their hands on the flag, and then I slowly grasped the handle of my gun and placed my hand on the flag. I swear on my flag and honor that I will not betray this flag, this country, and this nation, and that I will fight until my last drop of blood and protect my country. The shadowy faces of my friends, whose hearts burned with the Homeland Revolution, became serious. After I said it, they repeated it loudly after me. Just as I was about to speak, Tullet took a step forward, interlaced his fingers, and bit his lip. Pasha, can I tell you something? Here you go. I'm listening to you, Tullet. The new commander appointed by the Istanbul government to the Western headquarters, he said, suddenly falling silent and unable to swallow, looking into his amber eyes that were shining even in the pale light. I continued. So, what happened to the new commander? Don't leave him wondering and tell him, come on. Kalpakli raised his head and gathered himself. Commander Yusuf was saying that he would kill you wherever he found you and ensure the freedom of the country. I covered my mouth with my hand and laughed. Why are you laughing, Pasha? He can only kill our helpless bodies. He can never kill our soul and love right here. The spirit of a unionist never dies. I put my hand on my heart and looked into her eyes. While her cheeks were turning red, only the sound of her breathing could be heard. As the pale sun outside disappeared through the ashen clouds, the flickering oil lamp on the wall illuminated the dim room. I slowly folded the red flag on the table, put it in my pocket, and tucked the gun into my waist. Friends, the enemy is at the door. Italians are landing in Konya and its surroundings. They are advancing towards Aksahir. Mustafa Kemal Pasha, who managed the Unionists, will be among us soon. Enver stroked his sweaty mustache and said, I think we will need his opinions and intelligence, Pasha. This nation will rise above brave hearts. Our blood will flow. Let it flow. My tears will wet the ground. Let it wet it. The important thing is to save the homeland from the enemy. Enver Bey is right. We need Mustafa Kemal Bey's foresight very much. I turned my gaze from Enver to Saysavar. His eyebrows above his flashing amber eyes were furrowed like a bow, and his forehead was wrinkled. We are ready with everything. I do not want these dirty boots on our homeland. Understood? Understood, Pasha. They cried out in unison. May God be with you and help you. Don't let your hearts and souls be hurt, friends. While their eyes were smiling, they paid respect to me by pushing the chairs under them. Come on, guys, let's disperse before we attract any more attention. While Saysavar was jumping next to me with excitement, Feud, Sesme, Enver, and Tullet were already starting to descend the wooden steps, wearing their cardigans. The new year is approaching, Pasha. Yes, it will be another bittersweet year. We will be defeated by the enemy. My face was shadowed as my lip curled in sorrow. Saysavar looked at me without making a sound, breathing calmly. While the others were slowly leaving the building, we were left alone with Saysavar at the velvet-covered table. While my eyes were tearing up, I tried to hide my gaze from my very close friend. Pasha, did something happen to you? You don't look very well. Something has upset you a lot. No, I'm fine. I'm fine. Your eyes are constantly wandering. Your voice is constantly shaking. You become different when you talk about pain, Pasha. While my lower lip curled in suspicion, I tried to speak forcefully by interlocking my fingers. I said, watching the flickering oil lamp on the wall. Yes, Pasha? I think I have fallen in love, Sasavar. You may wonder why love is when the homeland is in such a state, but I fell in love with it. I desperately put my hands in my pockets and tried to warm my fingers, which were cold with excitement. Is such a thing possible, Pasha? There is no bad or good form of love. Love will bring out the happiness left in that lonely place of your heart in these difficult times, so that you can remember that little happiness there and laugh in the sorrow of war. That's right, that's right. You're speechless. I imagined Irva's smile in my eyes and laughed unintentionally. Is it the lady who fell in front of the door of the headquarters that night, Pasha? While the dusty and gloomy light leaking through the tulle curtain hit my flushed cheeks, I looked away from Shisuvar with my shy eyes. Home. Yes, I said, while wetting my lips with my tongue. Sasavar's lip curled with joy, and she turned her shining eyes to her snow-stained boots. I guessed it, Pasha. How did you guess? I was looking at his face as my confused eyes turned out of place. It was as if you had knocked over a bottle of wine, Pasha. Your hands, your feet, your eyes, they all move independently. It is as if your heart is declaring drunkenness, Pasha. He looked into my eyes while speaking, and his voice gave me courage. Is it obvious? As I said, my voice shook and I felt my cheeks turn red. And it is very obvious, Pasha. Sasavar, while placing his hands on his knees, he turned his misty eyes towards me with excitement. Sir Pasha? Don't tell anyone this, okay? May the love I hope for burn like embers in one corner of my heart. The cheerful smile on her curved lips gave way to a straight line, and she did not take her eyes off me. I would never say it, Pasha. Even the subject of such a thing would upset me. As he smiled looking at his sad face, he too felt relieved. What about your new novel, Pasha? Are you continuing to write? Asked. After hearing the sound of the doors closing on the lower floor of the mansion, I continued speaking. Even though it has slowed down a bit, yes, I continue. I clenched my fingers and remained silent. Believe me, Pasha, it will be a very good novel, and the fact that it was written under difficult conditions will add a special sanctity to it, just like your love in difficult times. Come on, let's go too, before it's too late. The Italians have surrounded the city. We stood up, pushing the chairs under us. After turning off the gas lamps on the damp wall, the room became completely dim. The gloom of the ashen clouds in the air filtered through the tulle curtain and fell on the wide table. Breathing in the damp smell in the room for the last time, I went down the wooden stairs, my leather boots literally hitting the creaking steps. When I opened the big embroidered door, a bitter and steely cold licked my face, giving me goosebumps, and I buried my head in the collar of my thick cardigan. Sasavar came to me after me, locking the door. As I lazily walked towards the end of the street, I whispered through my teeth. Do you smoke? While his eyebrows were furrowed, he looked at me helplessly with his distressed gaze. I think it will be good, Pasha. Her curved lips curled and her nose turned pink. I took a silver cigarette case from the inside pocket of my thick, fuzzy, and heavy cardigan, put it between my lips, and handed it to Sasavar. After shakily and shyly taking one of the orange-bottomed cigarettes, I closed the lid of the tray and put it back in my pocket. How beautiful is your Pasha, your tray. The new year is approaching, Pasha. Yes, it will be another bittersweet year. We will be defeated by the enemy. My face was shadowed as my lip curled in sorrow. Sasavar looked at me without making a sound, breathing calmly. While the others were slowly leaving the building, we were left alone with Sasavar at the velvet-covered table. While my eyes were tearing up, I tried to hide my gaze from my very close friend. Pasha, did something happen to you? You don't look very well. Something has upset you a lot. No, I'm fine. Your eyes are constantly wandering. Your voice is constantly shaking. You become different when you talk about pain, Pasha. While my lower lip curled in suspicion, I tried to speak forcefully by interlocking my fingers. I said, watching the flickering oil lamp on the wall. Yes, Pasha? I think I have fallen in love, Sasavar. You may wonder why love is when the homeland is in such a state, but I fell in love with it. I desperately put my hands in my pockets and tried to warm my fingers, which were cold with excitement. Is such a thing possible, Pasha? There is no bad or good form of love. Love will bring out the happiness left in that lonely place of your heart in these difficult times, so that you can remember that little happiness there and laugh in the sorrow of war. That's right, that's right. You're speechless. I imagined Irva's smile in my eyes and laughed unintentionally. Is it the lady who fell in front of the door of the headquarters that night, Pasha? While the dusty and gloomy light leaking through the tulle curtain hit my flushed cheeks, I looked away from Shisuver with my shy eyes. Home. Yes, I said, while wetting my lips with my tongue. Sesavar's lip curled with joy, and she turned her shining eyes to her snow-stained boots. I guessed it, Pasha. How did you guess? I was looking at his face as my confused eyes turned out of place. It was as if you had knocked over a bottle of wine, Pasha. Your hands, your feet, your eyes, they all move independently. It is as if your heart is declaring drunkenness, Pasha. He looked into my eyes while speaking, and his voice gave me courage. Is it obvious? As I said, my voice shook and I felt my cheeks turn red. And it is very obvious, Pasha. Sesavar, while placing his hands on his knees, he turned his misty eyes towards me with excitement. Sir Pasha? Don't tell anyone this, okay? May the love I hope for burn like embers in one corner of my heart. The cheerful smile on her curved lips gave way to a straight line, and she did not take her eyes off me. I would never say it, Pasha. Even the subject of such a thing would upset me. As he smiled looking at his sad face, he too felt relieved. What about your new novel, Pasha? Are you continuing to write? Asked. After hearing the sound of the doors closing on the lower floor of the mansion, I continued speaking. Even though it has slowed down a bit, yes, I continue. I clenched my fingers and remained silent. Believe me, Pasha, it will be a very good novel, and the fact that it was written under difficult conditions will add a special sanctity to it, just like your love in difficult times. Come on, let's go too, before it's too late. The Italians have surrounded the city. We stood up, pushing the chairs under us. After turning off the gas lamps on the damp wall, the room became completely dim. The gloom of the ashen clouds in the air filtered through the tulle curtain and fell on the wide table. Breathing in the damp smell in the room for the last time, I went down the wooden stairs, my leather boots literally hitting the creaking steps. When I opened the big embroidered door, a bitter and steely cold licked my face, giving me goosebumps, and I buried my head in the collar of my thick cardigan. Sesavar came to me after me, locking the door. As I lazily walked towards the end of the street, I whispered through my teeth. Do you smoke? While his eyebrows were furrowed, he looked at me helplessly with his distressed gaze. I think it will be good, Pasha. Her curved lips curled and her nose turned pink. I took a silver cigarette case from the inside pocket of my thick, fuzzy, and heavy cardigan, put it between my lips, and handed it to Sesavar. After shakily and shyly taking one of the orange-bottomed cigarettes, I closed the lid of the tray and put it back in my pocket. How beautiful is your Pasha, your tray, me Parson Boyle of Lat. I was startled by his voice. Instead of me kissing your hand, you kiss my hand. Astagfirullah, sir, can such a thing happen? The homeland is entrusted to you. I am here today, gone tomorrow, but the future expects something from you. Let final decisions never bind your heart or bind the love of the country in your heart. My eyes were sparkling as I bowed my heart-shaped head. May God give you strength. Can I learn your name? As his thin lip curled downwards, he pushed the snow accumulated under his stitched sandals into the stone gutter in front of the shop. Sinan. I'm glad, Uncle Sinan. I hope to be free on these streets soon. He did not raise his gaze from the ground while looking at his sparsely haired head. Amine. Come on, don't wait. Get out of here before those degenerates arrive. I felt his shaky fingers on my shoulder. We continued walking towards the end of the street, smiling at him while looking into his full eyes. After walking for a while without speaking, Sesavar's voice broke the silence. Did you see, Pasha? The spirit of the Committee of Union and Progress has already begun to blossom. This nation will believe in us, as long as we are on the right path. He was looking at me with proud eyes, while his glasses on his thin nose were fogging up. We are really starting to win hearts, but the Istanbul government is making our job more difficult with every move we make. As I sighed in distress, I stared at the tips of my leather boots. Our nation will understand who is what, who did what with whom. Don't worry, Sesavar. My house with its red bay window appeared at the end of the street, and I was shivering from the cold, burying my head deeper into my cardigan each time. While there was a deep silence, I heard the sound of dogs barking in the back streets of Ateş. I felt goosebumps, and I lowered my gaze to the ground again to make sure of the sound of boots stepping on the snow. A silhouette passed before my eyes, the wooden handle of a rifle pressed against my neck and pulled me back with all its might. While I was having difficulty breathing, I staggered back, unable to resist the force pressing on me from behind. I heard Saysavar's voice saying Ralph Pasha, and saw him fall to the ground in the same way. As my face was shadowed, a curtain appeared in front of my misty eyes. A loud voice was literally shouting, "Die." When I quickly pulled the arm that was pressing me with all its strength, there was an Italian flag on the pale cream-colored uniform. Holding my breath, I hung on the butt of the rifle. As he fell to the ground with the soldier behind me, I punched him hard in the middle of his face, dyeing the blood under my feet red. The smell of tobacco coming from his thin lips under his blonde mustache disturbed me. While the enemy soldier was writhing on the ground, I gave a strong kick to the plump soldier struggling on top of Saysavar. Saysavar held his throat with his hand and stood up from the snow. After crawling on the ground, the plump man found the rifle lost in the snow on the stone pavement and pointed it at me. After clenching my teeth together and squeezing them together, I tasted the heavy taste of blood flowing in thin channels from the top of my tongue to my lips. I opened a hole in the chubby soldier's forehead with the revolver I took from my waist. As the smell of gunpowder coming from the tip of my gun mixed with the smell of blood, I turned my angry gaze towards the other enemy soldier. "What was your purpose?" He said, wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth. "What are we?" The snowy streets groaned with the voice of Saysavar. "We were going to kill you," he whispered and sprayed the blood flowing between his teeth. "Who gave you this order?" "Yes, Commander Yusuf." He spoke in broken Turkish. When we came face to face with Saysavar, our saddened looks, without speaking, brought tears to our eyes. With all due respect, it is my duty to break that hand that is an enemy of honor and is reaching out to this country. While the loud sound echoing from my revolver made the birds landing on the fountain of the Grand Mosque take off, we left the Italian soldiers and ran away. My heart was pounding as we threw ourselves into the stairwell of my house. As I closed the ornate wooden door of my house behind us, the creak echoed between the wooden steps. The smell of dampness and humidity coming from my airless house combined with the oil of the kerosene lamp to create an unbearable smell. "How long will this continue, Ralph Pasha?" My eyebrows knitted and my fingers trembled. "Until we see real support, Saysavar, until we find real support." I took off my cardigan with melting snowflakes and hung it up, and freed my fingers from the black leather glove. Second day night. "Hello, Irva." While the smoke from my cigarette in the ashtray was blowing bitterly into my nose, I was still thinking about my novel. I stared out the window with my increasingly shadowy eyes. The snow stopped, and the streets of Ateş surrendered to bitter cold. As the novel I wrote was approaching its end, I personally wrote about what this nation, this city, these streets, and this Ralph were going through. While I was sitting in my room filling out the blank paper at the wooden table and iron-legged chair, there was a knock on my door. I hurriedly grabbed my cigarette in the ashtray, took my last breaths, and after pressing the cigarette into the ashtray, I shook the ash and smoke out of the ashtray with the back of my hand and stepped towards the door. "Who are you?" "My child, your grandmother Paloma." I heard a muffled but sweet voice from behind the door, and after opening the door slowly, I saw Grandma Paloma's face smiling at me. "Oh, I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm very worried that one day the police will come to my door. Because this cannot be over here." "It doesn't matter, baby. Can I come in?" I slowly opened the wooden door and opened it. The gloomy light reflected from the corridor fell into my room. Of course you can come in, Grandma." While her cotton-white hair, freed from her scarf, curtained her wrinkled forehead, her amber eyes looked at me with excitement and pride. He walked with difficulty, and I closed the door after entering the room. His face was white and chalky, his fingers were shaking, and his eyes were twitching. Without making a sound, he sat down on the pale armchair next to my wooden table, out of breath. I slowly pulled the iron-legged chair next to my typewriter and sat down next to it. After he smelled my cigarette, his face crumpled and his eyes rolled. "Did you drink that crap again, my dear?" "The only thing that's good for me these days is Grandma Paloma." She moistened her dry lips by interlocking her fingers. "Irva," she said, Swallowing, is there still no news from Irva? Even when I heard his name, my heart beat faster. No, I just hope to see him. I think I will wait my whole life, with the note in one hand and the tissue in the other. Isn't love just waiting for your loved one in an abandoned train station, even if you know you're lost? His eyes filled with tears. She jumped out of her cream-colored scarf and brushed back her white hair, which reminded me of a cotton field, with her shaky and bony fingers. You were in love with Irva. Irva was in love with you, my child. I hope you will be reunited soon. I interlocked my fingers, while Grandma Paloma was just sitting on the armchair without speaking. As my fingers pressed on the dusty keys of my typewriter, my eyes were misty and my face was shadowed. As the letters scattered on the blank page, I remembered that I missed Irva. I was amazed by her scent, her hair and her eyes, and I fell in love with her. Part 3. While the sound of music coming from the crackling radio filled my ears, I drank the gum-white alcohol remaining at the bottom of my glass with great pleasure and placed the oily glass on the table. Don't touch it, Ralph Pasha. When I raised my gaze, Saysavar was just looking at me with her sparkling eyes. It won't touch, I whispered through my teeth. I am drunk with the love of my country. I took strong breaths from the cigarette smoking in the ashtray and turned my gaze out the bay window. The lamps burning in the streets were falling on the snow, covering the city like a quilt. I listened to Saysavar's distressed breathing. Pasha, please do not drink any more. As the burning scent of anise hit my nose, I turned my eyes to the few appetizers on the covered table. All right. Ralph Pasha, I have something to tell you. While I was munching on the appetizer I put in my mouth, I cast my curious gaze over Saysavar. What will you say, Saysavar? Pasha. The expression on his face became dull and his lips turned into a thin line. Don't worry the person, Saysavar. Just say it. Mustafa Kemal Pasha was inspecting the military units in Kokakayr. It's only a matter of time before he comes here, Pasha. While I crossed my arms on the table, I listened silently to the crackling of the wood burning in the fireplace. Let him come. What if he finds us scattered? What if Aksahir is occupied? His eyes were filled with tears and his voice was trembling. The curved mustache under his small nose was also dripping with sweat. Such a thing will not happen. We will stand up against Mustafa Kemal Pasha, Saysavar. We trust you, Ralph Pasha, he said, moistening his dry lips with his uvula and pushing his wire-framed glasses, which made his amber eyes look larger, on his nose with his index finger. Now. What now, Saysavar? There are now Italian soldiers in the Western headquarters. I leaned back in my chair while interlocking my fingers. I whispered through my lips. Surprise. I wasn't surprised by such a situation. It is as if the Istanbul government has vowed to divide the country piece by piece. My eyes fell on the silver cigarette case lying next to the drawer. The raki had dried the inside of my mouth and warmed my veins. My bony, shaky hands reached for my cigarette case. When I opened the metal cover, the smell of tobacco came, licking my nose bitterly, and I inhaled the smell I was used to. I took one from it and handed it to Saysavar. After taking deep breaths, he put his hand to his heart and stated that he did not want it. While I slowly placed the plate on the lacy wooden fisco, I lit the orange-bottomed cigarette to my lips. As a sweet red color painted my eyes, I took one breath after another to let the tobacco burn. I felt the smoke in my lungs, my lips became thinner, and my face became shadowy. I blew the ash and smoke that accumulated in my mouth into the depths of my room with great pleasure. Saysavar remained silent, folding her arms in front of her. Her gaze was examining me from time to time, and she was avoiding me. I have to go somewhere. Saysavar, he stumbled backwards in the chair he was sitting on and turned around, his eyes popping out of his head. While my cigarette-smelling breath made Saysavar grimace, I continued my speech. I need to see someone. If there is any trouble, let me come too, Pasha. His thin, smooth lips curled. No need. It will take a short time. I will be here soon. But my Pasha. There's no buts, Saysavar. I'll come right away. My voice was loud and echoed among the pale walls. Just as I was sitting up by pushing the chair under me, My phone rang insistently. The phone on the dusty lace wooden table was ringing loudly, as if it made the house groan, and I ran away and picked up the receiver. As the crackling sounds filled my ears at regular intervals, I asked with my shaky and scared voice, "Here. Hello. Hello. Who are you?" I was relieved when I heard a familiar voice among the muffled crackles. "My Pasha," says me. "Oh my God," says me. "You scared me. Come on. I'm listening to you." While speaking into the dusty handset of the phone, I turned my relieved gaze towards Saysavar. "Where are you, Pasha?" "Home." "We are at home," says me. "What happened?" Saysavar turned to me with excitement. Sesme's voice became serious. "Don't go out. Don't leave the house, Pasha. Italian forces are everywhere. Hide as much as possible." My fingers, sweaty from squeezing the receiver, slowly relaxed. My eyebrows were knitted and my forehead was wrinkled. "Pasha. Pasha, do you hear the voice?" "Here." "I hear you," says me. "Okay, we are doing what is necessary," I whispered in an unconvincing voice. My voice was so weak that even I didn't believe it. I slowly put the phone back in its place and turned it off. While the gold-foiled phone was making strange noises, I blew the dust grains that came to the tip of my nose with the back of my hand. "What happened, Pasha?" "None." "How come, my Pasha?" He hit the table with his curled index finger and stood up from the table with his calm face. "Italian. Italian forces have descended on the streets of Axahir." While his wide forehead under his thick, wavy and black hair was sweating beads, drop by drop of sweat flowed down his neck. "Please, Pasha, don't go out. Don't let anything happen to you." "Irva. I need to see Irva. I don't care about anything right now. I want to look into her eyes and touch her hair." "I know, in your mind. What kind of love do you say at this time? You say puberty. But what makes love valuable is the love in shadowy times. If your heart is beating fast, it doesn't listen to real peace." "Then go and come carefully, Ralph Pasha." His eyes filled with tears as he stroked his curly mustache, which he held between his index finger and thumb. "I'm sorry, Saysavar. I didn't mean to break your heart, son. I am not a person who will be offended by what you say and shed tears. Pasha, it is not my place. You are my commander. What really makes me sad is, what if they catch you?" "Nothing. Nothing will happen. Don't worry," I repeated as I put my hand on his shoulder. "You wait by the phone. If anyone calls, let me know. Let's wait for news from the other team." "Yes, Pasha." Leaving Saysavar behind, I went down the creaking wooden steps, buried my head in my cash coat, and wrapped myself in my black furry scarf to avoid being recognized. As I breathed in and out of my scarf, the lenses of my wire-rimmed glasses were fogging up. When I opened the ornate wooden door of my house, a bitter and dry cold hit my face like a slap and gave me goosebumps. I ignored it and started walking towards Ova's house on the crushed stone street surrendered to the snow between the houses with bay windows. Italian soldiers were waiting at the intersections of every street with rifles slung over their shoulders. I walked without paying attention. The intense smell of coal coming from the chimneys of the houses was reaching my nose and constricting my lungs. I suddenly remembered that it was time to smoke less, so as I walked away with my hands tightly closed in my pockets, I just watched my snowy boots. When I arrived in front of Irva's house, I saw that the tulle curtains on the bay window were tightly closed. Irva was normally someone who never closed her curtains at this time of the day. My heart beat faster, my hand shook and my eyes filled with tears. After getting rid of the scarf that was tightly covering my mouth and nose, I wiped the lenses of my fogged glasses. My fingers grasped the handrails next to the stone steps, and I stood in front of the door. While I was trying to peer inside through the small window next to the door with my glazed eyes, the smoke coming out of my nose was rising towards the ashen clouds. I involuntarily grimaced because of the heavy smell of coal and gas lamp oil rising from the chimneys. I slammed my timid hand, balled into a fist, on the wooden door, one after the other. I said all the prayers I knew to see Irva in front of me. However, there was no sound or sign of movement from inside. As I started knocking hard on the door, I was startled by a loud voice coming from behind me. "There is nobody at home. I guess you're not convinced." As my hand fell helplessly, I turned my gaze behind me. A tall man with his hands in his pockets and a red fez looked me up and down while maintaining his angry gaze. "How do you know that there is no one at home?" Because they evacuated this house. I know from there where it will be. I paused for a moment, and when I turned back with my absent-minded eyes, the man continued to give meaningless looks. Who emptied it? I was even frightened by my own voice. House. Wasn't a lady and daughter living in the house? The middle-aged man spoke forcefully. Yes. Who vacated the house? He took his hands out of his pockets and took a few steps back. Push. The Italians emptied. I was in tears as my black, furry scarf, which I was holding between my fingers, reddened from the cold, slipped from my hand and was thrown to the ground. Who was this girl, young man, your lover or something? The house. Yes, sir, it was my lover. I couldn't swallow. My voice was shaking. Oh boy, try it again. Our hearts are broken, but what can the infidel and conscience look for in him? Tell me, who else understands us, who listens to us, my child, who is a doctor? They don't even look at us. They call them infidels, infidels. Tears were dripping down into the snow through the beard that had just begun to appear on his face. He slowly removed his dark red fez from his head and pressed it tightly to his chest. You are right, sir. What do they know about love? Don't worry. Be brave, my child. Be resilient. Show them your strength. Don't collapse. He couldn't swallow. He looked at me with his increasingly dark eyes. Your name? What is your name, son? Ralph. Ralph, sir, Papa. As he looked me up and down with his sparkling eyes, his thin eyebrows knitted together and his forehead wrinkled. Are you that commander, Ralph? The tone in his voice surprised me. You know, the commander who sold his homeland and nation for the Union and progress, he said. I clenched my teeth together and clenched my fingers into fists. My hands turned cold as there was no blood flowing to my fingers for a while. Sir, can you hear what comes out of your mouth? He carefully put the pale red fez on his head, which he held in his yellowish pale hand. He took a few steps and repeated. Yes, he can hear it just fine. You will realize after a long time that what you did was wrong. You will officially recognize the Istanbul government. His voice grew louder, trembled, and echoed throughout the snowy street. Sir, I say this out of respect for your age. Please get away from here. Out of respect. My gaze slowly shifted to my feet. As the man disappeared at the end of the street with angry steps, a piece of paper blown by the wind broke free from the door and flew towards me. While my face was shadowed, I picked up the piece of paper on the ground. The straw paper was folded into four, and the dark color of the ink could be seen on the outside. As I opened the paper, beads of tears were flowing from under my eyes. I felt nervous scent in my lungs with every move I made. I literally read the text written in crooked handwriting from Irva's high-pitched and beautiful voice. Dear Ralph, while you are reading this, I will be far away. I have never experienced leaving my own homeland, but they have kept me from my home, my homeland. I am writing this to you with a pen in my hand, accompanied by tears. I don't know where to go. I don't want to stay away from you. I long for your eyes so much. I long for your arms so much. I will miss you very much, Ralph. I leave my heart on this note. I have no doubt that you will find me. Then let's be happy in an environment without war. Forgive me. Can I forgive? You are a braver and more characterful person than the one I know. Forgive me, my darling. Maybe I don't deserve your love, but always love me. You have been my joy of life until today, and you will always remain so. If I die where I go for this cause, I will definitely find you in my next life. I'm glad I knew you. I'm glad I loved you. I will always live with you in my heart. Take care, okay? Don't worry about me. I'm closer to you than you are. Ova. As I skipped each line, the words stuck in my throat, and I was sobbing inwardly as I slowly folded the paper between my fingers. I put my head in my hands and cried for a while. Irva, I said, whispering through my teeth, I will always love you, Irva. I cried in sobs, holding the piece of paper between my trembling and cold fingers, like a mother holding her baby on her lap. While the snow was falling on Axahir again, the bitter cold licked my face. Desperately, I descended the stone steps and looked at Irva's windows with wooden shutters with tightly closed curtains. My eyes were misty and my heart was pounding. I couldn't say goodbye to you. I carried the burden of not being able to say goodbye to you. I was looking at the notepad and muttering to myself. As soon as I left the street where Ova's house was located, my steps accelerated towards the mansion where we met. My pupils were dilated and my brows were furrowed. After I slowly put the paper in my palm into my pocket, a strong voice echoed in my ear. I will recite. I will recite this adhin in the name of Allah. Your dirty boots cannot reach our goals. We sacrifice a vein full of our blood. I stood where I was. The sound was echoing from the courtyard of Hassan Pasha Amarat Mosque. I hid behind the snow-covered tombstones and listened to the voices without making any noise for a while. 2 Italian soldiers were cornering the imam of the mosque and putting pressure on him. You will not recite the adhin. Don't you understand us? Shouted the tall man. May God not give you the opportunity to lower the flag on this country and silence the call to prayer. Come on, get out of here. The imam's voice sounded tearful. While the frail man pointed his wooden-handled rifle at the imam, I stood up from among the tombstones, pulling my revolver from my waist. Put down your weapons. I won't say that again. After looking behind him out of the corner of his eye, he turned his sarcastic gaze towards me. If you don't want to die, go. He was speaking with difficulty in broken Turkish. I wonder if you should kill me, what it feels like to die with your body while your soul lives. While the imam stood without even blinking his eyes, gunshots echoed in the courtyard. While the pigeons sleeping on the edge of the fountain were rising, making the sound of their wings, the smell of gunpowder coming from the tip of the rifle spread throughout the courtyard. The imam lay on the ground with his blood flowing from his baggy, shabby cream-colored shirt and stained the snow red. One bullet is more than enough to take your life. It's that simple. As the veil fell over my eyes, I felt the taste of blood leaking from between my teeth on my lips. Without thinking, I pulled the trigger repeatedly. As the lifeless bodies of Italian soldiers fell to the ground, blood poured from the holes in their heads. My eyes caught the flag hanging on the edge of the embroidered door of the mosque. I ran and took the flag from where it was and draped it over the martyr imam lying in black blood. His cold and pale face looked at me helplessly for the last time. After covering the flag, I muttered, "Thanks to the homeland. Place. May you rest in peace, brave imam. The call to prayer will not stop. The flag will not come down. We are ready to sacrifice a vein of our blood after you." While putting my revolver on my waist, I ran away from the imam's cold corpse. While looking at the pale yellow facade of the mansion, I noticed the open shutters and lazily approached the door and opened it. As the ornate wooden door opened, I stepped into a deep gloom and was exposed to the intense smell of tobacco. While my friends, who realized I had arrived, gathered noisily upstairs, I went inside, shaking the snow off my boots. I took off my cashmere coat, hung it on the iron hanger next to the cream-colored armchair, and climbed the wooden stairs, out of breath. "Hello, friends." "Hello." My Ralph Pasha, whispered Sesme, and after looking at me with meaningless eyes, his thick eyebrows over his flashing eyes frowned. "Goodbye, my Pasha. What is the matter?" "Your bet and fuel have increased." Feud intervened by saying, "Yes, Pasha, Sesme is telling the truth." "Imam," I said without showing any change of emotion on my face. They martyred the imam. They are stateless. My fingers, balled into fists, slowly descended to one side of the velvet-patterned covered table. Did you see it, Pasha?" My bright eyes caught Enver's thin, curled and sweaty mustache. "I witnessed the incident. I couldn't swallow. I covered my mouth with my fingers as my eyes filled with tears, and I sobbed deeply several times." "What exactly happened, Pasha?" I stood up from the chair I was sitting on, wiped my tears, and picked up the phone receiver on the bright desk. "Let me call Saysavar first and then tell him. We have very important issues." They all stopped their work and turned to me. I dialed the number under my shaky and weak fingers and put the phone to my ear. Soon, Saysavar's hoarse voice was heard from the other side. "Here." "Hello. Hello, Saysavar. This is Ralph." "I'm listening, Ralph Pasha," he repeated despite the interruption of the voice. "Come to the mansion immediately. We are waiting for you." Strange crackling sounds were heard for a while. My fingers were sweating as I squeezed the hard handset of the phone, and he spoke, though forced. "Okay, Pasha." When I hung up the phone, I came face to face with myself in the stained oval mirror in front of the office. My curved mustache that matched my shapely face was dripping with sweat. My eyes that looked like a dot under my eyebrows were misty. My shoulders were slumped forward. My wavy black hair had grown and wrapped around my ear like an ivy, and my beard, which had just started to grow, had hardened on my face. "You have grown old, Ralph. You have grown old in your homeland," I said to myself. "Is Pasha coming?" I was distracted by Feud's voice. "What did you say?" "Sir?" "I say Saysavar, my Pasha. Is he coming? He never took his confused and worried gaze away from me. Yes, yes, it is coming, I said, slowly set up the chair from before and signaled my friends to sit down. Pasha, you were going to tell me. I'll tell you, says me, I said while interlocking my fingers on the table. As I was coming towards the mansion, I saw 2 Italian soldiers in the courtyard of Hassan Pasha Marat Mosque. They cornered the imam of the mosque and threatened him not to recite the adhan. Even though I waited for a while, I couldn't help but jump. I said, shoot me. I wonder what it feels like for the body to die before the soul dies. When the soldier got angry, he shot the imam and martyred him. My heart was torn to pieces. I finished my words. The tears flowing from my eyes dripped from the tip of my nose onto the velvet-covered table. What did you do to the soldiers, Rauf Pasha? Enver cast his curious gaze on me. Of course I shot him. What else could I do? My voice was shaking and my broad forehead was beaded with sweat. After examining me with his misty eyes, Enver muttered, If you say so, your name will be revealed to the murderer again, my Pasha. I am willing to be called a murderer for every blood I shed for the benefit of this country, as long as the homeland is free and Aksahir is free. After I finished my words, there was an insistent knock on the door of the mansion. Fute ran to open the door to the person I assumed was Saysavar. After a few howls were heard, Fute came from the front and Saysavar came from behind with quick steps. Hello, Rauf Pasha. Hello, friends. Hello, Saysavar, we repeated in unison. While Saysavar's curly mustache was covered with white snowflakes, an intense tobacco smell was emanating from his lips. I didn't pay much attention. My heart was still aching. Irva's absence seemed to sit on my left side. I could never understand whether I loved him or loved loving him. This must be what they call love, the kind that blows your mind. What was the important issue, Pasha? I was distracted while thinking to myself. What did you say? While my eyes opened with curiosity, my eyebrows were knitted. You said it was an important issue, Pasha. Enver was trying to understand why I was stunned while pushing his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose with the index finger of his left hand. I understand. Okay, let me explain. Enver interrupted me by pinching his chin between his index finger and thumb. You were bored with something else, Pasha? Would you like to share it with us? Saysavar approached the table with her chair under it, scratching her nose red from the cold. No. Pasha, you have been very calm since you arrived. Your face has almost turned pale. I swallowed hard as I stared at my feet with my glazed eyes. Irva, I started speaking. My eyes were filled with tears and my voice was shaking. Irva left Aksahir. As soon as I finished speaking, the expressions on everyone's faces became dull and their dark pupils opened. How can this be, Pasha? I found his letter in front of his door. He just left without even saying goodbye to me. While Saysavar was looking at me with tearful eyes, she clasped her arms together on the table and looked me up and down. Where did my Pasha go? I scratched my newly emerging beard and twisted my dry lower lip helplessly. I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe it is far away, or maybe it is just as close, in my heart, for example. There was a deep silence at the table. I took out my square embroidered handkerchief from my pocket and wiped the tears from my eyes. He will certainly return, my Pasha. Be astute, be strong. It is enough for us. Saysavar muttered through her teeth while watching the oil lamp on the wall with her absent-minded eyes. What is love, anyway, other than hopelessly hoping? I kept silent by interlocking my fingers. I collected myself and continued my words. Anyway, let me tell you about the plan I have in mind. It is a very important issue for all of us. Everyone gathered in their chairs and paid attention to me, their amber eyes shining in the light of the pale gas lamp. We are listening to you, Pasha. Enver frowned and focused on what I was going to tell him. Friends, enemy soldiers dominate our cities and our homeland day by day. They share our land without our knowledge. I have never tied our hands and waited for the decisions to come from the Istanbul government. And if anyone is going to wait, they should leave this mansion immediately. We fell in love with the Committee of Union and Progress. The truth should be like this. We all have a common goal, to sacrifice our blood for this country. While doing this, I know that you are not people who will blink and look back. Look, British ships anchored the ports of Istanbul, blocked the roads, seized buildings and means of transportation. They started to eat us from the inside. They are trying to divide our country. Our people's uprising and resistance is imminent. You know that Mustafa Kemal Pasha, the torchbearer of this resistance, will be in Aksa here in a few days, but we can't host him in this mansion, I said and kept silent and took deep breaths. My voice was shaking and my face was shadowed as I spoke. Tullet, who had not spoken nearly since I arrived, opened his eyes and asked with anxiety, "Where will we host it, Pasha?" "At the Western Front headquarters." But my Pasha, Sesni couldn't swallow. She slowly squinted her beady eyes. "But that place is in the hands of the army now. It would be very dangerous for us to do so." Without allowing me to speak, Enver intervened and spoke excitedly with his shining eyes. "Well, why can't it be in our hands?" My dry lips curled up slyly because Enver and I had the same thoughts. Enver is right. Why shouldn't it be ours? How so, Rauf Pasha? Saysavar was scratching her wavy black hair that had been freed from the cap. "We will take it from them." My relaxed attitude made my friends nervous. I saw beads of sweat flowing down Fute's forehead. "Are we only going to take 6 people away from them?" I stood there without speaking for a while, making rhythm on the table with my bony and shaky fingers. "Yes, we have no other choice. We will take that headquarters again." While repeating my words, I slammed my fist on the table. My friends fell silent, and while their gazes fell in front of them, I came face to face with Enver. "Friends, are you with me?" "Always, Rauf Pasha," they said in unison. While their amber eyes were shining, the anxious atmosphere on their faces had disappeared. "Then, we do what is necessary tonight and take over the headquarters again." While the sounds of breathing were heard from the table, I turned my gaze to the bay window of the mansion. The beauty of the falling snow was evident even through the tulle curtain. I watched the snow fall, trying not to smell the dampness coming from the walls. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The sun had set behind the snowy hills surrounding Aksahir, and the moon had risen as if to give hope to the dark night. The stars were shining in the corner of a clear night, and independent snowflakes were floating to the earth. Despite the bitter cold that licked my face, sweat dripped down from my broad forehead and onto my neck. I extinguished the cigarette flickering between my lips and quickly checked the revolver on my waist. Before folding my flag in the nightstand drawer, I kissed it and put it in my inner pocket. The sound of the night call to prayer from the Grand Mosque rose loudly and echoed among the deserted Aksahir houses. "Oh God, help this nation. Do not leave this country unattended. Don't give the opportunity to those who have their eyes on my beautiful country, beautiful Aksahir." I opened my palms to the sky, brought them together on my face, and said a very sincere amen. My tearful voice was shaking as my heart was beating out of its place. While the call to prayer continued to sound, I quickly went downstairs and put on my coat and scarf. I looked out of the small window next to the door. Snowflakes resembling cotton continued to fall faster. The lights of the oil lamps burning in the bay windows of the houses were reflected on the narrow and gloomy white street. When I turned around, I saw my shiny black typewriter on the wooden desk. When I looked at the written paper hanging from the end, my heart sank. I had disrupted my novel, but that was all it could do when the country was in this state. After placing the cap back on my head, I pushed back my wireframe glasses, which had fallen on the tip of my nose, with the index finger of my left hand. After turning off the oil lamp that was flickering on the wall of the ground floor, I slowly opened the door of my house, and as a steel-like cold took over my whole body, I involuntarily shivered. As I was walking towards the headquarters, leaving my house behind, the call to prayer had ended and the barking sounds of dogs could be heard coming from the back neighborhoods. The dark sky had turned gray and was falling on one's shoulders like gloom. Large snowflakes were licking my face, targeting my eyes. As I was walking with my hands in my pockets, just listening to the sound coming from my boots and the snow, a voice was heard from the wooden-framed and yellow-shuttered window of the house next to me. "Hush. Who are you?" I stopped where I was and scanned the surroundings with my flashing eyes. "Go home." It was a little child's voice calling out to me. My lips curled up involuntarily while my gaze searched for the child. "Let me see where you are." "Here. I'm here," he repeated, swallowing the food stuck in his throat. When I looked up, I saw the sweet boy eating the bread he held in his hand with great pleasure through the tulle curtain, looking me up and down with his excited eyes. Her wavy black hair was combed to the side, her cheeks were rosy, and she impressed herself with her embroidered pajamas. "Why would I enter my house? That's why enemies kill you." After finishing his speech, he took another bite of his bread. "Who told you that the enemy killed you?" My mother. My mother said, "Don't go out, don't go to school, otherwise they will take you away from me." Will they really buy it? His thick eyebrows curled over his bright eyes. Don't be afraid, don't worry, no one can separate you from your mother. The enemy should be afraid of you, not the enemy, okay? Let's see, what is your name? Ollie, he whispered while chewing the food in his mouth. Ollie. What a beautiful name you have. He continued smiling without saying anything. Ollie. Ollie. Close the blinds, it will get cold inside the house. Turning around with worried eyes, Ollie realized that his mother had arrived and without closing the blinds. Goodbye. Go home, okay? He said with a smile. I shook my head and continued walking towards the end of the street. We owe it to you, children. You will walk these streets with laughter, not fear. You will play games on this street. You will fall in love on this street. You will get injured on this street. You will heal on this street. The country will belong to all of us. We will dedicate this land to the smile of an innocent child. I continued walking quickly, muttering to myself. The snow could be seen under the pale lights burning in front of the houses. My hands were shaking and my face was almost frozen. When I arrived in front of the Western Front headquarters, I stood where I was for a while, watching the pale white facade of the building, its wooden framed windows, brown shutters, the vibrant honeycomb-colored lights burning in the rooms, and the roaring cast iron stove burning in the lobby. My eyes were full of tears and my heart was pounding. Pasha, I heard a low, whispering voice. When I turned my uneasy gaze behind me, I saw that my friends were sitting on wicker chairs under the plane tree right across from the headquarters, and they were looking at me. I walked towards them slowly. Have a good evening, friends. Thank you, Pasha, they said, their eyes shining and their faces smiling. Enver stood up from his wicker chair and took out his gun from his waist. When are we doing what is necessary, Pasha? The expression on my face calmed down, my eyes narrowed and my eyebrows knitted together. After looking throughout the headquarters, I fixed my eyes on Enver again. When the time is right, I said and let out the breath I had accumulated in my lungs, the ash-colored smoke coming out of my mouth mixing into the clear night. While I was watching the headquarters next to Saysavar, I sensed movement in the lobby. A silhouette was approaching the door. Pasha, look. I saw it, says me. I saw it. I repeated, sighing in distress. My fingers, shaking from the cold, were clenched into fists, and I felt my palms sweating from clenching them together. The wooden door of the headquarters was slowly opened, and the faint honeycomb-colored lights coming from the lobby fell on the snow and illuminated the front of the door. Two men came out. One of them was wearing a military uniform, the other was a civilian, and the red fez on his head caught my attention. Men of medium height were hugging each other and talking to each other with their voices damaged by cigarettes. I was watching the soldier with rapt attention. His short-cut brown hair complemented the almond mustache under his nose. As they turned to face us and started walking, I saw the silhouette of the man in the red fez. Ollie. This is Ollie Riza. While Enver gripped his knees with excitement, he prepared to utter a loud curse. Well. Hush. Par. Sorry, Rauf Pasha, he said, lowering his eyes, and I paid attention to what the commander said. The Istanbul government will lead us to victory. The Ottoman Empire, which we love, will reign in these lands again. Sunrise is near. Ali Riza Effendi, look here, the big world is with us, he shouted and showed the flag waving in the sky. When Ali Riza and I raised our eyes at the same time, we looked at the British flag waving under the snow. My heart was stuck. While I was gritting my teeth, I heard a not very strong voice behind me. Yusuf. This is Commander Yusuf. Tullet stood up from his wicker chair and continued to look at the man with a frown. What? Sir? I say, Pasha, this is Commander Yusuf. That person appointed by the Istanbul government, I said, looking at his pale face. Home. Yes, my Pasha, that is it. Let's take down that flag from that post, Pasha. I felt the pain of our martyrs in Kanakil. My heart was stuck. What kind of conscience do you have? What the hell are you? He was furious, and his hands began to shake with anger. Ali Riza and Yusuf, I said, while looking at the two of them with sarcastic eyes. Ali Riza left Yusuf and disappeared in the deserted and dark street next to the headquarters with the Italian soldiers behind him. Yusuf disappeared by entering through the ajar door of the headquarters. Everyone was squirming in their seats, looking at the building with narrowed, angry eyes. There is no point in waiting any longer. God help us, crazy hearts. Long live Rauf Pasha. Enver repeated and hugged my neck tightly. May God help you. May God help our country. He stroked his curly mustache and took out the metal-handled gun from his waist. Let me tell you, Enver, don't be crazy and put us at risk. Without taking his sparkling eyes off me, he let out a tiny whispered laugh from the tip of his nose. My heart was pounding as I walked step by step under the plane tree towards the area in front of the headquarters. I was praying inside, looking at the snowflakes blowing on my eyelids. Despite the darkness of the night, the sky turned a leaden gray color, and the moon illuminated our path with its gloomy shine. We stood in front of the door, trying not to smell the heavy coal and smell coming from the chimneys. The soldier standing right next to the door frowned, pointing the handle of his rifle. What are you doing here at this time of night? Disperse immediately. While looking at the soldier with calm eyes, I frowned and took my hands out of my pockets. Good evening, soldier. I won't repeat it again. Disperse and go home. While Enver was cleaning the snowflakes from his mustache, he squeezed my trembling fingers into a fist. Calm down, we are not enemies. Sesavar spoke sarcastically to the soldier with a fake smile on her lips. Go, man. Enver covered the soldier's mouth with his hand and took the thick-bladed knife from his waist and put it on the Italian soldier's throat. As the soldier fell to the ground with blood gushing from his throat, Enver slowly loosened his blood-stained hand from the soldier's throat. He said angrily, cleaning the knife and his hand in the snow. I need to get rid of the dirty blood on my hands immediately. How can even the blood of a human being be bad? It was as if he vomited hatred into the face of the soldier who was lying on the ground. Pasha, Tullet's trembling voice was heard. They shouldn't notice. They will notice. Tullet, we will go inside now. This is just the beginning. His eyes twitched while his hands and feet were shaking. I turned my uncaring eyes towards the door of the headquarters and slowly opened the door without attracting much attention. The warmth of the burning stove inside licked my face. As soon as I stepped into the lobby, the smell of orange peels burning on the stove filled my lungs. I remembered how much I missed you. Without spoiling it, I calmed the expression on my face. The soldiers working at their desks were shocked when they saw me. Because these soldiers were the privates who served with me. Rust. Hush. Be quiet. I put my dry and bony index finger on the tip of my pointed nose and told them to be quiet. Good evening, my lions. Good evening, Rauf Pasha. We missed you very much. My eyes filled with tears, I turned to my soldiers who were looking at me with their sparkling eyes and continued. I missed you too, my lions. They have spoiled you too much, Pasha, but good days are near. I cried for a while, hugging the frail soldier whose mustache had just turned sweaty. Oh, it is near. May God give you strength. Amen, Pasha, amen. Sesavar approached the table, wiping her tears with the square embroidered handkerchief in her hand. Can you help us? Say die. Let's die, Sesavar commander. Very good. We came to take this headquarters. The soldier's facial expression became dull, his eyes widened, and he could not swallow. But how can this happen, Commander? It's swarming with Italian soldiers up there. Enver smiled slyly while scratching his mustache. Don't worry, just help us after we do what is necessary. The soldier frowned while scratching his sweaty scalp. Required? Enver took his gun from his waist and looked up from the wooden steps. Nothing could be heard other than the occasional sound of a pair of boots. While rubbing her fingers, Sesme asked in a determined but low voice. How many people are up there? There are only 2 soldiers on duty at Commander Yusuf's store. Where were the soldiers swarming? The soldier shyly turned his gaze to Tullet. They are in the rooms. If the sound is heard, they will all flock to you. That's why I said. Don't worry, just protect us down there. Let this end quietly. While speaking confidently, I supported myself on one side of the table with my shaky hands. We are at your service, Rauf Pasha, he said while licking his dry lips. I took out my revolver from my pocket and grasped the handle of my gun with determined eyes. While my heart was pounding, beads of sweat were streaming down my forehead due to the heat coming from the stove. While I was standing in the lobby, I heard Enver's whispering voice next to me. Let's go, Pasha. Without wasting any more time, his wide eyes under his eyebrows, which were drawn like a bow, were opened with excitement, and the gun he was holding in his hand made his palms sweat. May God help us, friends. Let's not break away from each other, I said. Enver appeared right next to me, and the others followed us. As we climbed up with each step in our boots, the sounds of laughter and conversations were getting louder. When the two soldiers standing at the door of the command room saw us coming, they rushed towards us and tried to stop us. When I signaled Enver by raising my right eyebrow, we simultaneously took out our knives and stabbed them in their throats without even allowing them to speak. They fell to the ground covered in blood, making wheezing sounds, and filled the gaps in the wooden floor with blood. "Okay, Pasha," said Enver, without taking his hateful eyes off the Greek soldiers. I turned my sorrowful gaze behind me. Everyone was watching the closed doors with rapt attention. Nikolaos Trikoupis. Clenching my teeth together, I whispered the name of the commander in the golden frame. But wasn't the commander Yusuf, Pasha? I turned my calm gaze to Saysavar. He is just an intermediary. This nation knows who controls whom right now, Saysavar. My voice came out harsh, and my fingers clenched into a fist. Enver smoothed his curly black mustache under his small and red nose and put a bullet into the barrel of the gun. His large eyebrows were frowned as the sweat flowing through his wavy hair parted in the middle glistened on his forehead. He brought his snow-filled boots down to the rotting wooden door, and a dense cloud of dust rose as the door's hinges creaked and broke. Enver's face was shadowed, his determined gaze remained intact. While maintaining the seriousness on his face, he pointed the barrel of the gun at the blonde-haired, freckled commander sitting at the table and practically shouted, "This country endures all difficulties and overcomes all pain, but it will never forgive those who covet its honor and covet itself. Let it be known this way, okay, Mr. Nikolaos Trikoupis?" Enver, furious, fired bullets one after another. The redness coming from the tip of the gun and the intense smell of gunpowder hit my nose, and my heartbeat accelerated. I saw Yusuf reaching for the gun on his waist, so I couldn't stand it any longer and fired a shot into Yusuf's hand. As Nikolaos' lifeless body fell from the chair, Yusuf collapsed to the ground groaning, while behind me, guns were exploding and Greek and Italian soldiers were dying one by one. "First learn to lower that hand, Yusuf," I repeated. I was watching Yusuf with pleasure, with my amber eyes narrowed and his hand covered in blood. At that moment, when I rolled my eyes to my side, I saw Enver pointing a gun at Nikolaos' dead body. I reacted by quickly hitting his hand. "Enver, okay, you killed him." As he lowered his bright eyes in embarrassment, he placed his gun helplessly on his waist. "I'm sorry, Pasha. It's just a moment of anger." When I turned my gaze back, my friends had wounded 2 Greek soldiers and were waiting over them. "What should we do with these, Pasha?" Fiut looked at the soldier with his misty gaze, stroking his sweaty hair under his red fez. "Don't touch them. They will definitely tell you something." "Pasha, let's get bored." I interrupted Enver with my very strict voice. "No. What separates us from them is our conscience. If it were not for that, how would we be a Turkish nation? How would we be members of the Committee of Union and Progress?" "You are right." "You are right, Pasha," he said. I nodded my head in approval while my lips curled as if nothing had happened. While descending the stairs, 2 privates sitting below climbed the steps with excitement. I turned my eyes again to Yusuf, who was writhing in pain on the ground. "You fell into our hands, Yusuf," I said and grinned. "Oh, my hand hurts so much. Does your soul hurt too? Because I don't think those who sold their homeland have much soul." He clasped his blood-covered hands over his uniform and forced himself up from the rotting wooden floor on which he had been lying. He whispered through his dry lips, I did not betray my homeland. I stood by my state and did what was necessary as a commander." "You," he said, despite his breathlessness, "I was not dismissed like you. I think you should think about who loves their homeland more." I clenched my teeth together and clenched my fingers into fists in anger. When it comes to the state, it does not mean that it will always do the right things. You must first learn to see. As my voice echoed through the damp walls, I felt a shaky, bony hand on my shoulder. "Pasha, please calm down." When I looked out of the corner of my eye, I came across Saysavar's sorrowful gaze. I stood up with support from my knees. Both Saysavar and I were looking at Yusuf writhing in pain on the ground. As I put the revolver in my palm to my waist, I grimaced from the intense smell of gunpowder in the atmosphere. Just as I was about to leave Nikolaos' room, I heard a voice behind me. You are traitors. Your aim under the name of Union and Progress is to disintegrate this country. But the Istanbul government will never allow such a thing." My feet felt like rivets, and I felt a meaningless pain in my heart. While the tears flowing from my bright eyes were dripping from the tip of my nose onto the damp wooden floor, I reached for the gun on my waist with my shaking hand. Without even blinking my squinted eyes, I aimed the barrel and pulled the trigger without thinking. While the sound of the red flame coming from the tip of the gun echoed in the building, the smell of bitter gunpowder in my nose was renewed. The poor commander called Yusuf fell to the ground after receiving a bullet in his forehead. Pasha. Pasha, what did you do? Tullet never took his misty gaze away from Yusuf for a while. What is necessary? I said as I let out the breath that had accumulated inside me. As we descended the steps with uncaring eyes, we came face to face with Enver. Rauf Pasha, I hope it is not what I expected. Without speaking, I patted his shoulder with my hand and went down the steps. While the crackling sound of the stove burning in the lobby of the headquarters fed my ears, I opened the door. A dry and burning frost licked my face, giving me goosebumps. While wiping the tears from my eyes, I took out the silver cigarette case from my inner pocket and pulled one of the orange-bottomed cigarettes to my lips. I handed it over to Saysavar, who was right next to me and trying to keep warm by putting her hands in her pockets. Without hesitation, without taking off her troubled gaze, she put the cigarette to her lips. After taking deep breaths from the cigarettes we lit with matches, we blew out the ash and smoke into the clear cold night. While I was smoking the cigarette between my fingers with great pleasure and remembering Erva with sad eyes, Saysavar's weak voice broke the silence. Are you okay, Pasha? I kicked up the snow that accumulated under my feet with my boots. I'm not well, Saysavar. I'm not well at all. Why, Pasha? What makes you so sad? Don't you see, Saysavar? A cloud of gloom has settled over our country. We cannot say anything about the future. The more we work for our country, the more we are labeled as traitors. No matter what we do, we cannot be seen. Love is a problem in itself. God knows where Erva is and which snowflakes are sprinkled on her. I miss him so much, more than anything. Saysavar was silent, only puffing on his cigarette. I just gave Enver a lesson in conscience and ruthlessly shot use of myself. I sighed in distress. Sometimes it is necessary to kill, my Pasha, because in war there must be a winner. Yes, although conscience is at the forefront for us, our goal is to save our homeland. I pulled the cigarette from my dry lips and smiled involuntarily. While Saysavar and I were looking at the gradually clearing sky, we were watching the white and large snowflakes covering the barren-colored lands of the steppe with a white quilt. At that moment, the door of the headquarters slowly opened, and when we came face to face with Sesmi, he adjusted his cap and greeted me. As I took another drag from my cigarette and blew the smoke out, my eyes caught the silver-embroidered frame in Sesmi's hand. What is that, Sesmi? While his well-formed eyebrows under his broad forehead were frowning, his gaze excitedly examined the flag on top of the flag. My flag, Pasha, it is time for this flag to come down. I flicked the red ash from the tip of my cigarette between my fingers towards the snow. Sind, it must be slipping. How will you get there? Without taking his gaze off the white painted shirt, he squinted his eyes, took a deep breath, and unbuttoned his cardigan one by one. Ignoring the cold, he took off his cardigan from his large body and handed it to Saysavar, who was standing next to me with curious eyes. Don't worry, Pasha, I cannot allow the British flag to fly any longer. He opened the cover of the silver frame, took the bright red flag between his hands, brought it to his lips, kissed it 3 times and placed it on his head. Then, we showed our love to our flag in the same way. My voice trembled as my eyes filled with tears. We gathered under the post, crushing the snow drifts. I untied the knot of the moldy, creaking spool and slowly pulled the flag down. I whisked the British flag, which was covered in thin white, clean it. Meanwhile, Saysavar was watching me with uneasy eyes as she blew her cigarette-smelling breath into my face. I took the flag and placed it in front of the window with brown shutters. Pasha. Sir Saysavar? Why did you put the flag there? I kept the calm expression on my face. I cannot be disrespectful, Saysavar. After taking his hands out of his pockets, he turned his eyes to the pale flag in front of the window. But Pasha, that enemy, I interrupted him. Remember, we are not them. If I violate this flag, what difference will I be left from those degenerates, right? While Sesmi grasped the flagpole tightly with her hands, Saysavar remained silent with her timid eyes. Taking strength from his elbows, he came halfway to the ship and raised the flag. I wore it, Pasha. Oh God, may God bless you. May this body of yours that is cold for the sake of your nation not perish." He threw himself on the snow and started to pull on the ropes with excitement. While the pulley was making creaking sounds, our red flag was waving and rising into the sky. When I looked at Sesame, I saw that he was watching the flag as cheerfully as a child. "That's it, Pasha." While stepping back proudly, Seysavar quickly placed the cardigan in her hand onto Sesame's broad shoulders. "We are where we belong again, Pasha. We are at the Western headquarters, where our hearts beat." As the liveliness in my eyes disappeared, I intertwined and rubbed my fingers that were shaking from the cold. "Yes, we are back where we belong, but this will not please both the Istanbul government and the enemies. They will do their best to take this headquarters from us. The real difficulty of the task begins from now on." Sesame turned his troubled gaze from the flag to me. "You are right. You are right, Pasha. Of course, they will not give up easily." As soon as Sesame finished his words, the door of the headquarters opened again, and while the sweet warmth coming from the stove was licking my leg, I heard Fute's voice. "Commander Ralph, can you take a look?" I turned around without taking my fingers out of my pocket, shaking from the cold. "Sir Fute?" He handed me the envelope he was holding in his hand. "The letter that came out of Nikolaus's pocket, Pasha." My eyes moved to the paper with excitement. I quickly grabbed the letter from Fute's hand and slowly opened the envelope. The smell of straw paper mixed with the smell of ink licked my nose. When I opened the folded paper, I saw a text written in crooked handwriting. Sighing in distress, I began to scroll through the lines. "Dear Nikolaus Commander, you know that the Istanbul government appointed you here, and we are very honored by this decision. I would be very happy to have a sane, brave commander who does not betray our homeland lead our struggle. Yes, we know that your job is very difficult, but know that we, as Aksahir and Anatolia, are behind you. Both my commander Yusuf and you, my dear commander Nikolaus. We are always with you against our enemies, the Committee of Union and Progress, and we will not surrender this beautiful homeland to a group of people whose aim is to tear our country, Aksahir, apart. I have no doubt that you will erase the names of Ralph, Fute, Sesame, Enver, Seysavar, and the traitor Tulet from history. If our government and our Sultan trust you, we have no choice but to trust you too. Our state has always followed the path of truth, and today we are ready to fight hand to hand against those who call you traitors. Hukmuarate newspaper is always at your disposal. We are with you to finish our enemies, Commander Nikolaus. Ali Riza. Decree of Will. When I came to the end of the article, I couldn't swallow while my eyes were diving. I could feel the excited breathing of my friends right next to me, who were watching me with curiosity. I put my thumb between the folded paper and turned my gaze to the sky as I folded the paper. Who wrote this letter? I remained silent as the snow fell rapidly on my dark cardigan and the paper between my fingers. Later. Ali. It was written by the degenerate called Ali Riza, I said. Is that pro-Istanbul government, dishonest journalist Ali Riza? I let out the air that had accumulated in my lungs. Yes, that's it. I don't have the courage to call that guy a genius. The guy you call a journalist has purity and honor. A person who melts every time he sees the sun like this cannot be a journalist. My hands and feet shook as my voice rose. Seysavar spoke without taking her amber eyes off me. You are right, Ralph Pasha. He does not even have a stance. After straightening the pale red fez on my head and stroking my snow-covered mustache, I turned to Fute. Can you call Enver? He took his hands out of his pockets and disappeared into the headquarters with determined eyes. Friends, we are dispersing. You stay here on guard. If there is a situation, let's communicate as soon as possible. Yes, Ralph Pasha, Sesame, and Seysavar repeated in unison. As the snow was blowing from the gray sky, Enver appeared at the door with his face shadowed. You ordered me, Pasha. Yes, Enver. Let's go. His eyes turned as if they were popping out of his head. But my Pasha. There's no buts. Are you going to leave me alone in these streets? He came to me with shy eyes and buttoned up his coat. Is that possible, Pasha? I only said that so as not to leave the headquarters alone. My lip curled slowly. The others are staying, don't worry, I said and started walking under the dim lights in front of the headquarters. Even though Enver was reluctant, he fell behind me and started walking with me. From time to time, their footsteps mixed with their distressed sighs, but I ignored them. He ran to catch up with me, and when we arrived in front of the Grand Mosque, The night call to prayer echoed in the gloomy and narrow streets of Aksahir. While the muezzin was reading the adhan with his raspy voice, the moment when the imam was shot came to my mind. My eyes were full of tears and my face was pale. My attention was broken by Enver's voice. Still, do you still love Minerva? What? Should my story be left unfinished just because the war broke out? Of course, I love it. He turned his eyes to the minaret with its bright lights on, and while the call to prayer was ringing in my ears, I closed my eyes in peace and begged God to be able to reunite with Erva. Don't you have any information about where he went, Pasha? I sighed deeply. Oh, I wish I knew. I shall have no knowledge until I receive a new letter from him. Do you know what hurts me the most is that the person buried deep in your heart is far away from you. May God bring us together, Pasha, come together on good days. My lips curled with joy. Even the thought excited me. Amen, Enver. Amen. When we reached the corner of the mosque wall, he shook my hand and looked into my eyes. Have a good night, Rauf Pasha, he said. Good night, I whispered, without changing the calm expression on my face. With light steps, Enver turned into a silhouette at the end of the narrow, gloomy, and dark street and disappeared. So, helpless, I stepped into my house. My hand reached for the button on the radio in front of the shuttered window, and after my fingers slowly turned the dusty button, the sound of the folk song was heard among the strong crackling sounds, breaking the deep silence of the night. Greasy bullets tear the night. Don't let fear surround the mountains, my heart. May your migration not bloom on the path of roses. While listening to the folk song with great pleasure, I took out my steamed wine from my fridge and watched with pleasure as the blood-red wine was filled into the crystal glass. I missed drinking delicious wine so much that I enjoyed the tart and bitter taste by taking sips from the glass one after the other. I was watching the snow fall as I sat in front of the window with the blinds open. I quickly reached into the nightstand drawer and took Erva's snow-white embroidered handkerchief in my hands. I inhaled the scent on the tissue deeply into my lungs and felt as if it were next to me for a bit. While Erva's scent was wafting in my nose, I took another big sip of my steamed wine and turned my misty gaze to the snowflakes scattered like a quilt on the night. When the folk song on the radio ended, I took the last sip of my wine. As my eyes slowly closed, my head started to feel dizzy. I staggered up from the sofa I was sitting on and put Erva's handkerchief in my palms into the nightstand drawer. After leaving the steamed, empty glass on the table, I slowly laid my head on the pillow. As the tiredness of the day pulled my eyelids down, I heard a sound. When I turned my head from my bed, I tried to understand the sound. The wine I drank was making me dizzy terribly. The sound echoed again on the steps of my house, a strong hand knocking on my door. I stood up, pulling the snow-white quilt at my feet, tidied myself up, and went down the steps. As I approached the door, I started to hear a woman's voice sobbing inside. She was constantly crying and sniffling. While my eyebrows were furrowed, I grasped the cold, iron handle of the door with my trembling fingers and slowly opened it. Standing in front of me was a beautiful woman in a snow-white, thin tulle-like dress, her brown, wavy hair falling over her shoulders, her gaze falling forward, her tears dripping on the snow. Who are you? She sighed again and lifted the thin veil from her face. My eyes opened wide as my heart pounded. Erva was looking at me with her beautiful and bright face wet with tears. Erva. She threw herself into my arms while sobbing. I hugged her delicate and shapely body tightly while breathing in the scent of her hair. I missed you so much, Rauf. I missed you too. I missed you so much too, Erva. Where were you? Why did you leave me? His dry and bony fingers clamped tightly around my back. I didn't leave you. I can't leave you. I cannot live without you. Warm tears flowing from your eyes were dripping on the shoulders of my furry cardigan. Never leave me. Okay? Even if war breaks out, I don't want our love to be left unfinished. I want to live in your smile. Her body in the snow-white tulle dress trembled internally. Forgive me, my darling. Forgive me. I will love you very much. I will always love you. I am grateful to you for putting me aside in your brave heart. I believed in love in your arms. Forgive me, okay? It slowly slid out of my arms. He caressed my chin with his cold and trembling hands. When he touched his warm, moist lips to mine, we were both crying while kissing each other. The tears flowing from our eyes met on our lips. I felt his breath as he withdrew from me. He looked away from me with his full eyes. Strands of hair blowing in the wind were on the edge of my lips. I caressed her face as if I didn't want to offend her, and as I gathered her hair, she moved away from me step by step. Irva. Irva. Where to go? Goodbye, my darling. Goodbye, Ralph. I wanted to run after him as he descended the steps, but it was as if my feet were riveted. I will always love you. Even if I am far away, you will always be in the depths of my heart. She had already reached the end of the crushed stone street, the snow falling faster as her snow-white dress was blowing in the gentle breeze. As he collapsed helplessly on the snow-covered steps, I shouted after him. Even if I die in this war, I will find you and love you again in my other life. Irva, I will sleep on the edge of your dimples. I held my hands between my head and was sobbing. He disappeared around the corner where the stone gutter jutted into the street. While I was palming the snow on the ground, my knees buckled and I was stuck where I was. While my head was spinning, I sat up from my bed in tears and drank the water from the crystal glass on the embroidered bedside table with my shaking hands. I covered myself with the quilt at my feet and ran to the bay window. I pushed the shutter and lifted the sill. While my gaze was watching the narrow streets of Ateş covered with snow, my eyes searched for Irva, but what I saw was just a terrible, yet beautiful dream. The sun had forced its way out of the ashen clouds and continued to shine on the earth. A steely cold licked my face painfully, and I slowly stepped back, lowered the sill, and closed the shutter. The sun filtered through the blinds at regular intervals and fell in a grid pattern on my bed with unmade sheets. The wine I drank last night was making me dizzy and aching. I scratched my eyes, opened my closet, and looked for suitable clothes to wear. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. As the sun slowly revealed itself through the ashen clouds, I was walking quickly to the Western headquarters. I was adjusting the cap I put on my head and checking the time on the leather strap watch on my wrist. Because Mustafa Kemal Pasha could complete the Iljan maneuvers under the leadership of Ferritin Pasha and set foot in Aksehir. While I was passing by small shops in Arasta Bazaar, I heard a voice calling towards me. Ralph Bey, my son, Ralph Bey, my son. When I turned my eyes back with excitement, I saw a bent-over old man smoking the cigarette between his lips with great pleasure. Here you go, sir. While saying Nas, he burst into coughs, put his cigarette in the ashtray, and wiped his dirty hands on the piece of cloth in front of him. How are you? Said. I'm fine, sir. How are you? We are fine too, my son. May God give you strength. May my Lord compare you with those who love their homeland and nation, because that's what you are. I kissed his dry and bony hands while looking at him with grateful eyes. I am grateful, sir. How did you know my name? She averted her eyes from me, her frail body shivering from the cold. She slipped into the hot shop where she was forging iron. She licked her dry lips. Degenerate. The degenerate Ali Riza made you a hero by throwing mud at you. How could I not know? I smiled slyly. We are proud to have you with us. The people of Anatolia will gain their freedom thanks to you. While she put her frail and weak arms on my shoulders, she turned her gaze to the end of the market. Today. Will Mustafa Kemal Pasha come today? You know, that heroic commander of the national struggle and the Committee of Union and Progress? His cigarette-scented breath licked my face, and my moist lips curled with joy. Yes. Yes, Mustafa Kemal Pasha will be in Aksehir today. His eyes filled with tears. He patted my shoulder and forced himself to sit up, supporting himself from his waist. Come on, I won't keep you. Important duties await you. While blowing the wheezing breath coming from his lungs towards the gloomy air, I went back into the shop where he was forging iron and closed the door. When I arrived in front of the headquarters, I saw a meaningless crowd, but there were no occupying forces. When I opened the door of the headquarters, passing through the people gathered, I met my friends waiting for me with curious eyes. Oh, finally my Pasha. Oh no, what happened? I asked, while looking at Saysavar. We thought something had happened to you. I smiled involuntarily as I patted my head, which I saved from the cap. No, nothing will happen to me. In the silence that occurred at that moment, only the crackling sounds coming from the stove could be heard. Everyone was smiling and cheerful, as if there had never been a war. We are full of hope, even a little bit, Pasha. When I turned my gaze to Saysavar, she was just smiling at me. From where? That's because Mustafa Kemal Pasha, one of the brave commanders of the Committee of Union and Progress, will be here soon. I rubbed my hands together and put my bony fingers on his shoulder. This country will rise on the shoulders of many Mustafa Kemals. May God forgive it to this nation. My team had done its part and started to watch Mustafa Kemal's way with excited eyes. The door of the headquarters was quickly opened and Sesme's loud voice echoed in the lobby. Her neatly combed wavy hair was scattered in the post-snowstorm. "They are coming. They are coming, Pasha." Excitedly, I stood up from the armchair where I was sitting and put my thick, furry cap on, tidying up my hair that was parted in the middle. Sesme opened the door of the headquarters all the way and started waiting for us. With my heart pounding, I quickly walked out the door. As a steel-like cold hit my face, my eyes caught sight of the three group of horsemen approaching here. Horses' hooves were echoing on the snow-covered crushed stone street. Sitting in all his majesty on a snow-white feathered horse was a blond-haired man, his brows furrowed and his broad forehead wrinkled under his cap. His soldiers dismounted him with great care, his shiny leather boots halfway through his faded green trousers. After smoothing out the wrinkles with small hand movements, he approached me with regular steps. "Hello, Ralph Pasha." While his sharp blue eyes under his golden eyebrows widened in mine, I shook his hand, which remained warm despite the cold, and added, "Hello, Mustafa Kemal Pasha, welcome." His deep and authoritative tone of voice impressed him. As he passed me, a pleasant smell licked my nose. He put his hands next to his cap and greeted my friends with his loud voice. "Hello, friends." "Hello, Pasha." Their repeated voices echoed in the skies of Aksahir. As I walked next to him, my chest swelled and my heart felt like it was about to stop with excitement. Before entering the Western headquarters, he took a long look at the facade of the building. He rolled back the sleeves of his loose-fitting jacket slightly, put his hands on his waist, sighed deeply, and then continued. "Long live, together we will purify our homeland from these." My lips under my curly mustache curled with joy. "Thank you, Pasha. May the spirit of union and progress always live." He fixed his eyes on the door of the headquarters and walked inside with determined steps. Just as I was about to throw myself onto the warm walls of the headquarters, he turned around and added, "I just want to see Mr. Ralph and his team." While my hands and feet were shaking, the sweat rolled down my forehead and made its way to my neck. Enver, Tullet, Fiut, Seysavar, and Sesme started to follow me, looking at me with excited eyes. After Seysavar entered the room last, he slowly closed the door of the headquarters. Mustafa Kemal, with his hands on his hips, climbed the creaking wooden steps without even looking back. As the snowflakes on the furry coat slowly melted, the sweet redness of the flame reflected from the stove was reflected on his smooth skin. His eyes, under his blonde eyebrows, were sparkling and deepening like an endless sea. "Here you go, Pasha, your room," I said, pointing to the room with a bed next to the office room. After filling his lungs with air, he slowly opened the door. While his boots were beating the rotting wooden floor, I caught sight of the typewriter I had forgotten on the table. "The typewriter," he began by saying, his lips curled up cheerfully under his curly and thin mustache. "How beautiful. Whose is this?" He lifted the straw yellow paper hanging from the end and looked at it. My Pasha. I'm sorry, it's stuck here. Let me get it," he said, grabbing my arm tightly as he went to the typewriter. He hummed the writing on the paper with pleasure. "Maybe love meant living a lifetime in his eyes looking at you." My shy eyes bowed to the ground in shame as my cheeks turned red. What a beautiful sentence this is. Is that so? Is that so, sir? Of course. Are you writing a novel? I couldn't swallow, so I parted my hair again with my hand. Yes, Pasha, I was writing a novel, but it was left unfinished when the war broke out. His bright golden eyebrows over his flashing blue eyes frowned. Even if war breaks out, art will not lose its value. Art will always live, and the artist will always exist. They will try to insult and denigrate art, but never allow this, okay, Mr. Ralph? As his determined voice echoed throughout the room, he turned his eyes back to the black typewriter under the pale honeyfoam light. Never. I will never allow such a thing, Mustafa Kemal Pasha. With your permission, let me get my typewriter. Make yourself comfortable. He watched me with his misty eyes, and as he slowly lifted the typewriter, the dust and honeyfoam on it dispersed under the light. Relax, rest, Mustafa Kemal Pasha. He slowly laid himself down on the snow-white covered bed. While I was closing the door, he was watching around with absent-minded eyes. I left the typewriter on my desk without any change. The room smelled intensely of blood and gunpowder. I carefully took off the cap on my head while trying not to smell the smell, and the snowflakes accumulated on it scattered haphazardly on the wooden floor. The ornate wooden door of my room clicked softly. "Come," I called in a low voice. The door creaked open, and the dim light leaking from the corridor was reflected in my room. My friends entered the room with shy steps and closed the door. "Come on, sit down, friends." I pointed to the red cushioned chairs in front of my table. "Good luck, Ralph Pasha." "Thank you, Enver. Why did you come?" Enver moistened his dry lips and stroked his curly mustache. While his amber eyes were watching the red flag on the wall, he continued his words. "Mustafa Kemal Pasha," Saysavar began. "Mustafa Kemal Pasha, very strange." I crossed my arms on the table, my eyebrows furrowing over my still eyes. "What is strange about Mustafa Kemal Pasha?" Sesmi cleared his throat and adjusted the collar of the pale shirt he was wearing. "A very brave commander, Pasha. They called him a cowardly traitor, but his walk, his looks, his speech, his mannerisms and his stance almost scream that he is a hero. Wherever I make eye contact with him, my knees literally give way and I melt where I am. But I believe that his brave heart will be a gift to the Turkish nation." When Sesmi finished her words, my lips curled with joy and my eyes narrowed. It is indeed so. Once again, I was proud to be with him in the Committee of Union and Progress, Ralph Pasha. Fyut repeated while rubbing his interlocked fingers. "You are not the only one. Anatolian people are proud to be with him. While there is a death sentence against him, he fights for his country by not listening to anyone, and we support him," I said, my embarrassed eyes lowered to the ground. "Anyway, Lions, there's no need to be demoralized. We will save our homeland again and be in the hearts of our nation where we deserve. Not living, but dying. We will risk sacrificing our blood for this country," I said and looked into all of their eyes. Tullett shook his head proudly. "May our blood be sacrificed for this country, Pasha." His eyes narrowed with excitement as his broad forehead wrinkled. There was a deep silence in the room. Only the deep humming coming from the corridor of the headquarters could be heard. Enver cleared his throat and started speaking. "Ralph Pasha, both Italian and Greek forces forcibly evacuated many houses in Aksahir and seized the people's property and property." I clenched my fingers and made a fist. My palms were sweaty. They exceeded their limits. They tried their patience very hard. I got up from the leather-covered swivel chair I was sitting on and threw myself in front of the window. The snow was falling from the sky as if to announce goodness and beauty. While I was breathing deeply, I inhaled the smell of dampness and humidity that came to my nose into my lungs. Their strongest representative is, of course, Ali Riza. "Ali Riza," I babbled with my trembling voice. "Friends, the Istanbul government has now officially shown that it has broken away from us. There is nothing healthy about the decisions made by the Istanbul government, which was under the British mandate. The Sultan gives death penalty to everyone he comes across and those who truly love their country. From now on, we will do what is necessary. As I said, we will die if necessary. Understood?" While each of them looked into my eyes with excitement, they stood up from their chairs and repeated in unison. "Understood, Pasha. If you don't have anything else to add, you can leave." As they left the room one by one, Saysavar stayed last, his hands reaching into his pockets as he watched her with curious eyes. After his fingers fumbled in his fabric pocket for a while, he took out a piece of paper and looked at the paper with his full eyes. "No, Saysavar, what is that paper?" He couldn't speak. He had to swallow hard while moistening his lips with his tongue. Letter Ralph Pasha." My eyebrows furrowed as I slowly approached him. "What kind of letter is this?" He smiled painfully, his lips wet with tears. "Love, and black love, my Pasha." He held the envelope between his two fingers, painfully pressing it to the middle of his heart, and then desperately held it out towards me. "What will I do with this letter?" "This is entrusted to you, Pasha. You deliver it to Maypair." I did not dare, because even if I die in this war, these lines will remain behind me. My eyebrows knitted, and my hand shook as I grabbed the paper with great passion. "Okay, I'll deliver this to Maypair, but what's the point of dying?" "It is impossible to know, Pasha. We are in a bitter war." "Don't worry, I will deliver this to Maypair." Faced with my harsh tone, he bowed his misty eyes and left the room. When I got to the window with the blinds open, I took out a cigarette from the tray, put it between my lips and lit it. As I took one breath after another of the bitter tobacco, I blew the gloomy smoke into the leaden gray clouds. ****. The moon took its place in the sky as if it were a light in the night, and it was floating into my room through the tulle curtains. I leaned back on the chair I was sitting on and closed my eyes. The sound of dogs barking in the back streets of Ateş could be heard from far away. While I was sitting there with my fingers interlocked, there was a knock on the door of my room, one after the other. I turned my absent-minded eyes away from the shuttered window and repeated with a loud voice, "Come." The door opened slowly, and looking through the door was none other than Salih Bey, Mustafa Kemal Pasha's best friend. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Rauf, but—" "No, sir. Is that possible?" I called him in and said, "Come in." Mustafa Kemal Pasha. He stroked his small mustache on his thin lips. "He wants to meet you. He is waiting for you in his room." While my hands and feet were shaking with excitement, I quickly sat up from the leather chair I was sitting on. As per order, immediately. I straightened my clothes, took off my cap, and combed my shiny hair neatly. While my hair, parted in the middle, was fluffy, my mustache with curved ends was sweating. I squinted my eyes as my boots pounded the wooden floor. As I got closer and closer to the room with the closed door, my heart felt like it was going to stop. I couldn't help but wonder if he saw something wrong with me. I knocked softly on the door, my hand shaking. "Available," his thin and not very strong voice echoed in the corridor. As soon as I opened the door, a very pleasant smell wafted into my nose. When I entered the room, her sea blue eyes were quite thoughtful under the brightly colored table lamp. He was playing with his pen between his fingers, taking notes from time to time. "You ordered me, Mustafa Kemal Pasha." Come, sit down," he said, pointing to the wooden chair in front of the table. I sat down and watched him with curious eyes. While folding the colored map, he scribbled a few more words, then put the pen between his fingers in a corner and turned to me. "How are you, Rauf Pasha?" "I am fine, Mustafa Kemal Pasha. How are you?" "Actually, I'm not well at all," he said, his blue eyes misty. "What is bothering you, Pasha?" He sighed in distress and stroked his mustache with troubled eyes. "The state of the country, the state of Ateş. Look at this situation. The sparks of war are burning in the country, and the government is on the side of the enemies. When we work for our country, we become traitors, and an arrest warrant is issued against us." He smiled sarcastically. "You are right, very right, Mustafa Kemal Pasha. But let them declare us traitors. This nation will sooner or later understand who is friend and who is enemy. The task on our shoulders is heavy. The burden on our shoulders increases day by day. But we are a free nation. We never compromise our freedom." The tone in his voice was almost reassuring. I continued my words, looking into his increasingly dark blue eyes. "Yes, Pasha. We will defend our homeland at the expense of our lives if necessary." Taking a deep breath, I remained silent, and a deep silence prevailed in the room. Only the faint whisper coming from the gas lamp on the wall could be heard. As my curious gaze wandered over Mustafa Kemal's desk, I once again admired his orderliness and discipline. "Pasha, didn't you sleep? Your bed is still intact. Your eyes are about to close from lack of sleep." He looked at me with distress, his shaped lips forcefully curled up. She stroked her bright golden blonde hair parted in the middle and began to speak in her cracked voice. "Sleep? It's not my place. The moment I lie down in bed while the country is in this state, remorse consumes me. This nation will remember you well, Pasha. This nation will remember you well." While I was proudly repeating my words, he bowed his head and looked at his feet. I leaned back in the chair I was sitting on, and he turned his blue eyes, which resembled an endless sea, towards me. The smell of tobacco emanating from his lips licked my nose. Are you in love, Mr. Rauf?" As my eyes bulged, I leaned forward, interlocking my fingers. My cheeks were flushed, and my shy eyes were drawn to Mustafa Kemal. Yes, I am in love, Pasha." I swallowed hard and tried to collect my voice. Because my heart started beating fast and I started to cry. I understood from the lines you included in your novel, and I waited for a suitable time to ask. I hope I didn't make a mistake. No, Pasha. What's wrong? Is such a thing possible?" While crossing his arms over his chest, he stood up from the leather-covered chair he was sitting on and stepped next to me. He put his long and bony fingers on my shoulder and waited for a while without making a sound. "Can you give me your name too?" "Erva, my Mustafa Kemal Pasha." He sat down slowly on the chair next to me and whispered through his teeth. "Erva. What a beautiful name she has. I hope your love lasts forever. Love each other forever in these beautiful streets of Axahir, in freer times. I smiled joyfully while looking into his eyes. I remembered Irva and felt sad again. Third day morning. Hello, Irva. Words are inadequate when describing you. The things I have to say are stuck in my throat. I just get stuck. I don't even enjoy the cigarette smoking between my lips anymore. The sun rose today, as it does every morning, and leaked into the room through my tulle curtains. I don't know at all what to say or tell you. My only wish is that I hope you are well. I fall asleep with your handkerchief infused with your scent and wake up with it. I no longer get the same pleasure I used to while writing my novel. While the pen in my hand was moving over the paper, I heard the voice of someone whispering through his teeth. My son Ralph, don't worry so much. I shook myself from my thoughts and came to my senses. What? What happened? I'm telling you, don't worry too much about yourself. Irva ran away from the war, not from you. Let these bad days be left behind. You will be reunited. His white hair under his scarf fell on his forehead, adding a special joy to his pale face. I'm sure. I'm not sure, Grandma Paloma. Now I have doubts. I pushed back my wireframe glasses, which had fallen on the tip of my nose, with the index finger of my left hand. Don't think like that, my dear. You are still young. You two have a lot of time to live. I writhed in distress in the winged chair I was sitting on. I told it to Mustafa Kemal. I told it to a hero. Even living with the dream of your love is very beautiful. When you hear his heartbeat in the place of your own heart, you understand how beautiful a feeling it is to love. He caressed my wavy hair with his shaky, bone-like fingers. With difficulty, he leaned down to my forehead and placed a strong kiss. Rest assured, he loves you very much too. He couldn't bear his eyes when he looked at you. You will deserve the best of everything. The war will definitely end, and you will be reunited with your Irva. As my eyes filled with tears, I threw myself into Grandma Paloma's hands, kissed her trembling and bony hands, and placed them on my forehead. God. May God bless you, Grandma Paloma. You are too sensitive-hearted for this world. You know that, right? He covered his mouth with his hand and laughed loudly. I've never seen him smile this much before. While his thin eyebrows, resembling cotton, were frowning, his eyes, which had become darker and lighter, became serious. You are ready to sacrifice your life and blood for the country. You don't know that you are the ones with the most sensitive hearts. We are old people now. I felt his peaceful breath on my neck as I hugged him tightly. I lost my mother at an early age, but Grandma Paloma became my spiritual mother. Yes, Irva, look, I told Mustafa Kemal about you. I will live for you as long as this heart beats in this soul. I will find you. I will deliver to you these letters that I wrote while crying, with a pen in one hand and a paper in the other. Look, it's very close to the end of the war. I don't know if I will live, but even if I die, my soul will seek you and find you. Love gained meaning with you. You taught me love. You taught me how to love, and I never want to say goodbye to our love. I don't want to say goodbye to Axahir. Irva.